That testing protocol, that could be initial draft in there. I'm not going to say that you guys are meeting on Wednesday. If they get clarification, you're supposed to send me total output. We send you it.
No, I
Order to stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Marty, will you do roll call for those present, please?
Mary Jo Radmansky.
Here.
Mary Jo Radcliffe. Here. Thomas.
Here.
Troy Webb.
Here.
Amy Buckman.
Here.
Ann Beamer. Brad Dobbs.
Here.
Thank you. And has the meeting been noticed to the public according to open meeting laws?
Yes, it has.
Thank you very much. I see some are choosing not to follow the face covering policy, and we ask that you please socially distance. The board is elected to create and monitor board policies to assist in the operations of the district. Through this work, we seek additional input from our community. We do this through surveys throughout the year, as well as through public comment sections on the school board meetings, as well as casual interactions with the community. We have a procedure for public comments at board meetings that we will share with you again tonight. Please remember that this is a business meeting of the board that's held in public. It is not a public meeting. Our board of 7 elected officials are committed to making local decisions based on the best local information available. If at any time you have input that you'd like to share with the board as a whole, please forward that information to Dr. Severson, and she will ensure that it's included in our board packet materials. If it is a comment for individual board members, you are free to share throughout the month as you see appropriate. Please know that these communications are not part of the official board materials unless they are forwarded to Dr. Severson. Finally, there are laws that limit the amount of discussion the board can have outside of a public notice meeting. This means that if you send a message to all 7 board members, we are restricted by state statute from engaging in any conversation about the topic unless it is on the public notice agenda. And this would be called a walking quorum, which is unlawful. So with that, we'd like to move forward with discussion about the public participation of board meetings. Dr. Stevenson.
So I'm hopeful that everyone can hear me. Yes, in the back? Yes, perfect, thank you. So after last week's meeting, the board president and I consulted with our attorney to make sure that our public comment section is meeting the needs of everybody involved. So with everything that Mary Jo just said, our intention is for the board to seek input from the community while still making sure that it remains a business meeting of the board held in the public. And so we have some new procedures to outline in school board rule. Just for a point of clarification, any changes to board policy are first submitted to the policy committee for an initial reading and review, and then either changes are recommended or it is forwarded to the full board for consideration, and then it goes through 2 readings before it becomes a new policy. An administrative rule is just that, an administrative rule, and is open to be changed at any point in time without that more formal procedure. So, the procedures for public comment are not all that different than where we've been in the past. It just clarifies things a little bit more so that we are positive everyone is comfortable we are following with our procedures. So the policy is not changing at all, but the rule is that we are asking everyone to register prior to the meeting beginning. We will open registration 20 minutes prior, and registration to speak will be open until after the end of the public comment section. So that means if somebody says something, you did not register, you would like the opportunity to say something, you can still go over to Marty Herzberg, board appointed clerk, and still sign up to speak. It is definitely best practice to have people who are addressing the board put their name and relationship with the district in writing so that if there's follow-up that is needed, everybody knows who it was, who spoke on what topic, as opposed to trying to rely on people's memories. So you will sign up with Marty. The procedure for recognizing, once the public comment section opens, we will start a 30-minute timer. Each speaker will be allowed to speak for 4 minutes per sign-up. So when you are finished with your 4 minutes, and if you would like to speak again, and we're still during that 30 minutes of public comment, you may go over to Deputy Clerk and you may sign up to speak again. At the end of the 30 minutes, if there are still registrants signed up that have not addressed the board, Deputy Clerk Marty will let us know that, and Mary Jo will call to question from the full board, would we like to extend the public comment section, or are we ready to move forward? If a vote of the full board decides that we should extend the public comment section, each speaker is allotted 2 minutes to speak as opposed to the 4. The response from the board, that's something that we've talked about a little bit before. As Mary Jo said, if you are presenting something that the board has some clarifying questions for, they can certainly ask you those. They can't do any investigation. The legal word is they can't have substantive conversation because it wasn't publicly noticed on the agenda for other people who might also like to participate in that discussion. So you might hear the comment from the board, thank you for sharing, thank you for participating, and then it may land on a future agenda for full discussion, but is not something that they can fully discuss this evening. One significant change in an effort to be able to conduct the business of the board is that during that public comment section, If you are interested in speaking to a specific agenda item, that will also happen during that public comment section. So when the public comment section is closed, the board moves forward with their business, and there will not be further public comment sections allowed after each agenda item. All of that will come up front during that public comment section. Does anyone have questions? That's it.
Yeah, why did you decide these rules today change, and under what bylaws can you authorize rule change?
So the board operates on board policy, they don't operate on bylaws.
Okay, there's nothing in Wisconsin statute as far as changing rules, so what
There is
policy?
statute about administrative rules, Betsy, there is. So I'm going to just tell you, this is what the board has decided for tonight, and if part of your public comment is that you'd like it different, you're welcome to share that, and the board will consider that public comment moving forward. And if you're asking why we had the conversation, last week's meeting was not a civil discourse of conversation, and the group prefers to communicate in a more respectful manner, and thus trying to organize the conversation willing. So with all those changes, now that you understand the changes, if anyone would still like to sign up for public comment because you didn't know all of that beforehand, you are welcome to do that with Marty. She's got the sign-up sheet there. Are there any other questions before we get started? Okay.
Okay, then Marty, will you read off the first name? And as you come up to address the board, just come up to the front here.
So the first name on the list is Betsy Settlebauer.
And I think last week's meeting was very cool. So, my name is Betsy Settlebauer, I live in Hickston, Wisconsin. I'm a 91 graduate. You'd like to spend my money, so that's kind of why I'm here tonight. Last week, yeah, some comments from the board actually got me thinking last week, and I was disappointed at numerous comments that board members did make at the open meeting. All open meetings are open to the public. In fact, the Wisconsin statute, the Wisconsin School Board Association, the National School Board Association, even our own district policies encourage public comment. So instead of asking why are they here, it should be about time the public starts showing up. National School Board Association said most school board members are elected by the people in their community to represent their values, views, desires for the public schools in their districts. As selected leaders in their community, they consistently communicate with the public to keep community members abreast of challenges, ideas, and progress. In fact, the NSBA gives 6 key reasons on why you should take public comments. Number 1, education is not a line item in the school board budget. It should be the only item. Number 2, the school board represents the community's voice in public education, providing citizen governance and knowledge of the community's resources and needs. The board members are the policymakers closest to the student, besides their parents. The school board sets the standard of achievement in the school district, incorporating the community's view of what students should know and be able to accomplish. Number 4, the school board is accessible to everyone in the community and is accountable for the performance of the schools in this district. It is the community members' right as a board to select new board members. We'll work diligently to provide an opportunity for students to receive high-quality education, which enable them to succeed in their career, college, and life. 6, the school board is the community's education watchdog, ensuring that taxpayers get the most out of their tax dollars. So I am speaking. I know some people wonder, I'm a homeschool parent. Why in the world would I bother the school board in coming? The reason is because there's a lot of parents that fear you guys, that they make comments, you'll take it out on their kids. I told them that should not be the way. There's even a lot of staff in our district that are fearful to approach you, and especially our administration, for retaliation or you being fired. I don't think that's what you want. I'm going to quickly make a statement about masks. I sent you all local districts across Wisconsin that have masks optional. Question should be, how in the world do we know what she sent us is true? I would ask that question. I hope you guys did the legwork, started calling districts, asking them why they switched, what made them switch. I hope you do legwork and just pass the buck and say, this is what we're going to do. We have local districts around us that just changed their mask mandate to mask optional. Throughout our country, judges are declaring mask mandates against the law. I asked you guys to call a special meeting again and vote on this, talk about it, look at the evidence that's out there, give the parents the right back to determine what's best for their child. As far as vaccines, I've heard various parents say the districts are pushing for staff and students to be vaccinated in the fall. Let's remember, this is experimental. This is not an FDA-approved vaccine. Also, they're exempt from the normal rules of trial vaccines out there. I know I have a son and a husband who are in various trials.
There are 30
The
seconds
amount of
remaining.
complications from these vaccines, we have to put medications on hold if they're under these rules, and they're not. I lost a family member to COVID, even though they had cancer and other ailments. COVID was to blame. I lost a family member 2 months ago, after the second day after they took a vaccine shot. The doctors cannot rule out the vaccine RNA did not spike the brain aneurysm that killed them. I have 2 high-risk family members at home. Last year we were told if they did it, it would kill them. Guess what? They're still alive and we've all had it. Fear is a powerful thing. Silencing is a powerful thing. Look at the evidence, don't pass the buck. Call a special meeting and vote to let parents decide what's best for their kids. And parents, if you're listening online, you can take back your 5% to follow the policy that the school board doesn't even enforce. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. Okay, yes.
Thank you for that, Betsy. My apologies, I meant to tell everyone, thinking that it may be pertinent and relevant to all of you. When we get to agenda item 6.3, update from Public Health Department, the recommendation at this time that I will be making to the board from Public Health is that the district sunsets the mask mandate as of June 30th, recognizing that we will continue to look at local data and local trends and make decisions in collaboration with Public Health and the other 2 schools in Jackson County. But the recommendation to the board tonight is to sunset the mask mandate as of June 30th. And I meant to say that before public comment, my apologies. If you would please tell us number 2 and their purpose that they signed up to speak.
Sandy Rosenberg, she signed up to talk about mass equality, vaccine.
Thank you.
I'm just gonna throw this out there because I have a question. Do you know when that would be voted on?
6.3.
Okay. And then, so, you know, as Betsy said, you know, masks are, they're going away. That's the short version. I just want to remind everyone that they greatly reduce the amount of oxygen we're taking in, the amount of fresh air we're getting, and we're breathing in all that stale, exhaled air. Trees breathe what we breathe out, not us. We're kind of suffocating ourselves when we wear them. And our community appears to be about 80% mask-free already if you take a look around. I didn't really get to finish saying that last time, so I just wanted to point that out. My notes on vaccines are, again, yes, it is not FDA approved. And secondly, it should not belong in school, especially with the children, as they are, a majority of the children, I think we can all agree with that term, are very unlikely to have serious side effects from COVID. So giving them a vaccine that could give them serious side effects doesn't seem right. Anyhow, I mentioned the lack of oxygen, and you can follow up with Dr. Ben Lynch. I sent that notice to many or all of you. And he did a study with his own children. He tested it out, even with a face shield, they were still losing a significant amount of oxygen intake. And then equality, I just want to point out that ever since we started, I mean, I teach too, not in a traditional sense. I don't have a license. I did teach repeated oral assisted reading one time for 2nd grade over in Winona, and it was a blast. I loved working with the kids, but each one of them was amazing. I never separated them out into groups. Well, this one is this one is that. It was like, oh, this is Emily. She's great because. This is Sam. He's great because. And I never, tried to group them differently because of their ability or their nationality or anything else. So I think we should keep the focus on equality and not divide them up. As some of you have mentioned at the last meeting, you kind of feel that way too, that it's important. to help them but not split them into groups. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Number 3.
Patty Jacobson, and she registered to speak about board communication and superintendent relationship.
First of all, thank you all for serving on this board and the time and effort that you put into it. And thank you also to Dr. Severson, who works incredibly hard at the job. I know she does. From time to time, it's kind of important to look, in fact, and review. It's recommended by WASB to review the role of the board and the superintendent and that relationship. Guidelines are provided by state statute and by the Wisconsin Association of School Boards. According to those guidelines, as mentioned by Mary Jo, the role of the board is to develop policies and plans for the district. The board is elected by the citizens of the district to represent their collective interests and the interests of the district, including the students, the staff, and the administration. The superintendent is hired by the board to implement board policies and plans. The superintendent is the educational expert in these issues to provide guidance, information, and otherwise advise and manage the staff. And this has to be a collaborative relationship between the board and the superintendent. The superintendent is accountable to the board. Board members, by definition, are not accountable to the superintendent except to collaborate with respect. The information shared and when shared appropriately by the board members, the community views that are represented, and the expertise the board member shares should not be disregarded, demeaned, or otherwise marginalized by the superintendent or by any other board member. When the superintendent and board members single out when the superintendent and the board president single out board members and call them into the office, it has the appearance of intimidation intended to silence the views represented by that board member. State statutes and open record laws guide communication between board members, not the superintendents of the school districts. Communications can occur freely among board members to provide, share information, and two-way communications can occur among board members as long as communications are among less than, in our situation, would be less than 4. So if board members want to communicate about issues, it's not against the law as long as it's not a forum and a two-way communication. You can find that, all of this information, which I used to put together this, which is in this, which all of you should have, and in this, which is the keyword of the school board. That last statement, as long as communications are among less than a forum, and when there is no express or tacit agreement to act uniformly, exchanges among separate groups of members may take place without violating open meeting laws. It is not the superintendent's job nor the board president's job to control or monitor board communications unless there is a strong suspicion of violation of open records laws, which must include, again, at least 4 members of the board participating. When texts are received from members of the community, even during meetings, it is not necessarily in violation of open records laws, and texts between spouses are protected and private and not subject to subpoena. I just wanted to review this because I think that there are a lot of times attempts to control communication that could be helpful and beneficial among board members and among board members. And I'm hoping that those lines of communication can stay there.
Matthew Lynn is the next name on the list. He marks that he wants to speak about an agenda item, but does not list the agenda item.
Right, it was sort of difficult to figure out which one it was, because I don't remember exactly where I was reading on the website, but my name is Matthew Lynn, I live in Hickston. I'm a father of 3 in the district. And from what I was reading, I think it was the 09 Finance and Facilities. It sounded like when we were deciding where the funding was going to go, that we were going to use, we were going to change from a plan of equality to a plan of equity. And if you look at what equity is not a level playing field for everyone. Equity is deciding which people get which funds depending on their race. Well, if you're looking for racism, that's racism. So I think that we need to ensure that we do not shift from equality, what we've been striving for decades, to equity, which is racism in another form. You don't fight racism with more racism. A couple of things about the mask mandates. Masks are going away, like she said. So far, I cannot find a study that shows masks or distancing reduce spread. There isn't one out there. So every time someone has ended mask mandates, any state, any locality, anytime they've ended mask mandates, all the predictions were they're going to spike. All the cases are going to spike. There hasn't been a spike. There hasn't been a spike for voting. There hasn't been a spike for the motorcycle ride that occurred that they said was going to kill everyone. There hasn't been any spikes for any of these things. It's all wrong. The CDC has made predictions. First they said, we don't need to walk around with masks on. Then they said, you definitely need a mask. Then they said, if one mask is good, 2 or 3 are even better. They have no idea what they're talking about. Let's not listen to people, the who doesn't know what they're talking about, because they after Taiwan decided that there is human spread, showed them verified proof of human spread for a month. The WHO was still saying, we don't know what you're talking about, this is only bats. So instead of taking all of these ancillary bodies, I think that we're smart enough in Jackson County, Wisconsin, to look at the data and say, all right, this is what we need to do. This is what the data shows. If there's no data that shows this is helping anything, it's only hurting. Because I have a pre-K son that now has to do speech therapy because he can't see his teacher's face when she talks. She can't see his mouth, or he can't see her mouth. So he doesn't know how to form the patterns with his mouth unless he's talking to his parents or his sister. So if we are determining what we need to do based on external entities, and those external entities can't make up their minds, we have to make up our minds here. Thanks.
Next name is Robin Huffman. She wanted to speak on an agenda item but doesn't list the agenda item.
On the mask. Hello, my name is Robin Huffman, and I've lived in Blackford Falls for almost 40 years. I graduated from Black River. I have 2 boys that are school age. By profession, I am a social worker, and I do believe that there are many great teachers and staff in the Black River Falls community and surrounding districts. And today I'm here as a parent because I care about my children, all children in this community. My children would have been enrolled in preschool last fall. However, with so much unknown about what the school year would look like with regards to COVID, my husband and I decided that homeschooling was in our best interest. And the protocols at the time, the masking, sanitizing hands, chemicals for cleaning, and the restrictions to the children's days, I felt were not in my children's best interest. I would like to speak my thoughts on this topic of concern, which is the masks. With our loss of freedoms and these restrictions of mandating masks, in my opinion, the harm that these masks have on young people physically and psychologically, in addition to, I believe, risking their health, well outweighs any benefits. And being mindful of time, I will focus on many of the concerns that are out there for numerous parents and caregivers of children, which is all the potential pathogens that end up on these masks. We are not the only parents and community members with concerns. There was also a group of parents in Gainesville, Florida, who had concerns about the potential harms regarding masks that their children were being forced to wear. This was from townhall.com, and it was dated June 15th of this year. These parents submitted 6 face masks to a lab for analysis. The resulting report found that 5 masks were contaminated with parasites and fungi, including 3 dangerous pathogenic and pneumonia-causing bacteria. And no viruses were detected on the masks, although the test is capable of detecting viruses. The analysis detected 11 alarmingly dangerous pathogens on the masks, which included tuberculosis, pneumonia, 3 different kinds of meningitis, sepsis, encephalitis, bloodstream infections, UTIs resistant to antibiotics, E. coli, Lyme's disease, diphtheria, Legionnaire's disease, and then in addition, severe infections with high morbidity rates. Half the masks were contaminated with one or more strains of pneumonia causing bacteria. 1/3 of the masks were contaminated with one or more strains of meningitis causing bacteria. And 1/3 were contaminated with dangerous antibiotic resistant bacterial pathogens. In addition, less dangerous pathogens were identified, which included fever, ulcers, acne, yeast infections, strep throat, periodontal disease, and Rocky Mountain spotted fever, and there were more. The face masks that were studied were newly or freshly laundered but were wearing and had been worn 5 to 8 hours, most during in-person schooling by children aged 6 to 11. One was worn by an adult, a t-shirt worn by one of the children at the school, and unworn masks were tested as controls. Proteins found on the t-shirt, for example, are not pathogenic to humans and are commonly found in hair, skin, and soil.
There's 30 seconds remaining.
One of the parents pointed out that this small sample points to a need for more research. We need to know what we are putting on the faces of our children each day. Masks provide a warm, moist environment for bacteria to grow, and these local parents contracted with a lab because they were concerned about the potential contaminants in masks that their children were forced to wear all day, taking them on and off, setting them on various surfaces, wearing them in bathrooms, etc. And they had, I'll just mention that they had sent it into the University of Florida's Mass Spectrometry Research and Education Center for analysis. So please just consider making masks optional for the children in our community. Thank you.
Person on the list is Sarah Publicman, and she wants to speak on the agenda item that wasn't listed.
Okay, my name is Sarah Burkman, I'm from Rock River Falls. I've been here for about 3-4 years now. And I love my children. I'm a homeschool mom. I have 5 of them, and they are a beautiful hope for their future, for the future of this country. I also love history, and I love the fact that learning from history, we hopefully will not be doomed to repeat it. One of the things that I wanted to bring to your attention was that we have a constitution in both the state and the federal level. I know I've mentioned this before, but the Constitution has a list of something they call the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights was written in the Constitution not so that the federal or state governments could violate those or find loopholes to get around them, but so that the federal government and the state governments could be reminded that those rights are not to be touched under any circumstances. Whether we have an emergency, whether we're at war, those rights are not to be touched because those are God-given and they are above government. This last year has proven to me that our country has forgotten what those Bill of Rights were put in there for. Our founding fathers set that in motion so that we would be the first nation in the entire world from the beginning of time that actually acknowledged basic human rights above government, that self-governance was something that we would have a right as human beings, no matter who says otherwise, that those rights would never be violated by our government, and if they were violated, we would have the right to stand up against that government, because that's called tyranny. The school board is put in place to overlook the education of our district, and to make education the #1 priority for every student in the district. You are not required to provide medical advice or policy. That is for each individual, especially that is in the hands of the parents, because the parents are the ones who are responsible for their children's health and for their own. Anything medical needs to be used to a doctor and a patient, and again, like I said, the parents being the ones making the decisions for their children. I understand the sunset is being discussed today, but I want you guys to think about this going forward. Before any other emergency takes place, and you can better believe that our governor and our presidents and other people in government will be trying to find opportunities for new ways to control the population. When these things happen again, we need to be thinking long and hard before we are putting any sort of medical or any sort of policies in place that do not have anything to do with education. Because those policies are not their job. We have a First Amendment, we have a Fourth Amendment, Wisconsin Constitution, Article 1, Section 1, all people are by nature free and independent, have inalienable rights, Wisconsin Constitution, Article 1, Section 3, every person may freely speak. The moment you put those masks on, you must have somebody. You no longer are freely speaking. I'm having a hard time hearing a lot of you speak for that because the masks are on your face. Disabilities. We're trying to require disability, or we're trying to require people with disabilities to wear a mask. And they don't have to tell you why we are not able to wear a mask. That's their private health information. But we're being bullied or coerced or made to feel intimidated and called disrespectful for not following those policies, and that's not your right or your responsibility. Your responsibility as the school board is to look over the students' education and do that in the best way possible. I have, with failing grades for the last, since 2015, the proficiency of math and English language. Those things are what you guys need to focus on. It's figuring out how to get those feelings right. Thank you.
Thank you.
He's here to speak on an agenda item, but he doesn't list the agenda item.
And also community member, Nicole Sullivan. Yeah, 5 beautiful children who are part of our future, and I am very glad that I'm afforded the opportunity to address the board today. I had a couple of things. First, as this vaccine rollout is continuing, and I'm just concerned that what's going to happen is that we're going to get to a point where we try and initiate some policies that are separately equal. That doesn't exist. There's no such thing as separately equal. We learned that during segregation back in the 60s. That does not work. And I'm starting to touch on something that Sarah said about how these are God-given rights, about how, what man gives, man can take away. But what God gives, only God can take away. So these rights that we have, they are inalienable human rights. And so part of that is the right to our medical information being private, our medical information being between us and the doctor. That's why it's called protected health information, PHI. And there are very strict regulations on what practitioners and doctors are able to share and with who they're able to share. And patients and people are allowed to maintain that privacy for very good reasons. I was reminded of something that came about after World War II, the Nuremberg trials. And out of the Nuremberg trials came something called the Nuremberg Code. And I just called it up here. It's about permissible medical experiments. And some of the points I want to go over briefly. Some of the things that have to be in place for permissible medical experiments. The voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. It means that the person involved should have legal capacity to give consent, should be so situated to be able to exercise free power of choice without the intervention of any element of force, fraud, deceit, duress, overreaching, or other ulterior motive of constraint or coercion, and should have sufficient knowledge and comprehension of the elements of the subject matter involved as to enable him to make an understanding and enlightened decision. This latter element requires that before the acceptance of the affirmative decision by the experimental subject, there should be made known to him the nature, duration, and purpose of the experiment, the method and means by which it is to be conducted, and all inconveniences and hazards reasonably to be expected, and the effects upon his health or person which may possibly come from his participation in the experiment. The duty and responsibility for ascertaining the quality of the consent rests upon each individual who initiates, directs, or engages in the experiment. It's a personal duty and responsibility which may not be neglected to another, may not be delegated to another with impunity. That was number one. The rest of them are shorter. The experiment should be such as to yield fruitful results for the good of society, unprocurable by other methods or means of study, and not random and unnecessary nature. Okay, and then there's another 8 of them, and I know that I'm running out of time, and I really urge you all, if you have not read the Nuremberg Code, it's a memo that came out of the Nuremberg trials, and it's very, very relevant to this day and age. Thank you very much.
Next name is Matt Carls, and he's here to speak on an agenda item. I don't know that agenda item number.
Hello again, everybody. Matt Carls, I live out by Hickston. I've got a daughter being first grade and a son in 4K next year. Just want to address a couple things. One being the mask mandate that you imposed on our children this last year. It's good news to hear that you're considering fading that out. It's also sad to hear that you're doing that based off of recommendations off the Public Department of Health in Jackson County. All along, you've been conversing with parents and medical and opinions of the parents and those children. I'll remind you that 0 children in Wisconsin died from COVID-19, absolutely 0. And why June 30th versus April 30th for fading that out? Ask yourself that. What's changed now versus 2 months ago? Essentially nothing. Yes, few more people are vaccinated. We've known for months and months that, in general, children are not at high risk to the virus, and they do not pass it on and spread from mask mandates being taken down and stuff, as I mentioned earlier, has not occurred. I will just say that, it's sad to hear that we've had this last school year basically lost for some kids that had speech delays, for example, and other needs that haven't been met because of the mask and face coverings. The decline in social abilities, emotional development for kids has been something happening for years and years. I think, something that occurs that's been a benefit and a curse at the same time as the smartphones and technology now. I've seen my kids and my nephews and cousins and just friends that the verbal communication, eye contact and stuff is hard to come by now anymore. I do like this layout tonight because last meeting I was at in May, several of you had to get back to me, which I find it hard to understand what you're trying to get out of parents and interaction if you're getting back to the speaker. Besides the mask, I guess I would just encourage you to move on from it. It's done and over with. Masks didn't work to begin with for kids. All it did is put them back. As far as CRT, critical race theory, this is something I want to address as well. It's included in your equity statement that you had a meeting on last week. I have a brother-in-law and a sister who are teachers in the city of Madison, and I grew up down that way, and I chose to raise my family up here in rural Wisconsin, further away from Madison because of the troubles that I grew up with the indoctrination going on in schools close to Madison and in their colleges and so on. I look forward to raising a family up here in Black River Falls, and it's sad to hear that critical race theory is being considered, and equity is the top trendy term in school districts now. And don't kid yourself, if you're talking about equity, CRT is part of the conversation being passed to you from the State Department of Instruction. I believe that all people are created equal, and equality is not the same as equity. Equity is a dangerous path to human destruction. Equality for all is what we should strive for. That's what's on your walls in your schools and on your website. Equality for every student, not equity. You don't give every kid a trophy for sports. You don't give every kid a passing grade because they showed up to school. The parents have to take responsibility, so does the school district, on catering needs to each individually, equally, not just equity. So I encourage you to look at that. think about the conflict that CRT has with the state Constitution, the Constitution of the United States, the physical founding of America, and really what we should worry about is the basic moral values that every kid, every person in the United States and around the world is created equally. And I just encourage you to continue the conversation with parents. So, thank you.
If I could, before you start, this is the last of the 30 minutes, and so if there's anybody that wanted to sign up for further public comment, after this one, the board will decide if they're going to extend that time period or not, so I just wanted you all to know we're just at that 30 minutes. So I'm sorry I didn't take that from your time. You got 4 minutes, so ready when you are.
I don't have children here, I got grandchildren here. And I'm glad I don't have children in this day and age. Children don't see color, they don't see the critical race theory stuff. The school's supposed to teach our children math and English. It's the parents' responsibility at home to teach them their values that they want to move forward. The whole mask thing, granted, why do I have to wear a mask? I don't know. COVID is real. It was bad when I had it, when it was the flu back in January of 2020. A human hair micron is 4,000 times smaller in area and 80 times smaller in diameter than human hair. The COVID virus is 1/10 of that. I think we're moving in the wrong direction. Countries around the world that put masks on their females and stuff, that's to keep them down. It's so they're not a member of society. We gotta quit stealing these kids' identity. It's proven that they need their peers to grow. So everything needs to be looked at. I mean, it's all headed the wrong direction. You know. With that said, I'll yield my time to anybody that wants to use it. Thank you.
There's one more person on the list.
So the board, if there's one more person to speak, does the board wish to continue on with the public comment? Okay, I'm seeing nodding from everybody. Do we need a roll call on that? Okay. I'll go ahead with the last person. Thank you.
Ross Goldsmith?
Hello, school board. My name is Ross Goldsmith. Lived in this area 46 out of the 48 years I've been on this planet. Both my kids graduated from the school district. Okay. And there has been issues, as with everything in life, that everybody's had to work through. My biggest concern right now, dealing with the kids, because I also coach the youth wrestling program. Last week's meeting, it was brought out that a traveling sports organization came in. I've heard everywhere from there were 7 teams to 70 teams that were at this. All of our facilities were used. No one, including the fans, had masks. My question to the board is who's enforcing this? And when my season starts, which is in the winter, if this mandate has not gone away, what are my options as a coach? Because as you can see, I don't believe in the mask. I'm a firm believer that everybody needs to get sun, dirt, and be around people to get healthy. I believe that our kids need more physical education rather than sitting in a classroom or their home in front of a laptop. So my question to the board, if I put out to the parents that I will be having practice in the high school wrestling room, number one, are you going to take that opportunity away from me? Number two, if I put in my sign-up thing that masks are not required at practice, this is your parents' and wrestlers' choice to come, are you gonna demonize the program? And number three, if any of those two happen, what are my steps of recourse to get this problem fixed? Because I don't think these work. If you look at the data as of last Friday, in the United States, there has been 5,882 deaths attributed to vaccine reaction. When the SARS-1 went through, they stopped offering the vaccine that they had tested at that time at 54. You take a recommendation from a health department that takes a recommendation from an entity that is receiving money from an individual who says, with vaccines, we can reduce the world's population by 10 or 15%. And the majority of this board, in my opinion, thinks that's okay. My question to you is, why? And that's all I got. I want to know the answers to my 2 questions and your reasons why. All my contact information is on, I'm sure, my kids' transcript yet. And if you need me to write it down, I'll write it down before I leave. Like I said, I live here. And unless I win the lottery and want to move to Bora Bora, I don't plan on leaving. And if I'm not leaving, I'm probably going to be a big pain in your guys' butt because this I'll keep bringing it up and beating a dead horse. Because we said so, it didn't work when I was growing up with my parents, and it works even less now that I'm an adult. Thank you.
The board will take everything into consideration. I make a motion to move 6.3 update from Public Health Department right up front now. Is there a second to that? Okay. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Okay, we'll start with update from Public Health Department.
So I already shared with you my multiple conversations last week, and the fact that public health is comfortable with all 3 Jackson County schools sunsetting the mask mandate at the end of the month. I would share, as we have said every time we speak since COVID started, was that everything is contingent on local data and information, and if our trends turn significantly, that public health may come back with different recommendations, but at this time, that was a recommendation that they were comfortable with. Additionally, in your packet, you received information about some of that testing protocol that I shared briefly last week. We have not met to discuss that. That meeting is happening on Wednesday. I was hopeful it could happen before this meeting, so I'd have updates for you, but the other 2 districts were unable to meet, and so both Elizabeth and Jill will be part of that conversation on Wednesday, and we'll have updated information. Right now, they were just documents that were created. There's been 0 back and forth dialogue about them. So they are included for your review. If you have questions or comments, certainly reach out before Wednesday, and they'll come before you again after the discussion.
Does anyone have any questions?
Do we still have a week of summer school yet?
We do.
Before the end of the month?
Yep.
And so is that why the recommendation is to end it June 30th? Is because that's the end of summer school?
So that's not the end of summer school, but it gives people an opportunity. So I fully recognize these people would be in the minority in this room right here, but we have some parents who send their children because there is a mask mandate. And so to end it immediately leaves those kids without a plan moving forward. And so we thought the end of the month was a natural break to just say, this is when it's going to happen, and then they can make that change if that is what they would like to do.
Any other questions?
Well, those children that send their students to summer school, if they have an option, they can still wear the mask.
they could, if you choose to make them optional, they certainly could send their child in a mask. That has not been the dialogue up until this point, and certainly there's a couple principals here that would agree that some parents, it is the mandatory masking that has had them sending their children to school this year. Again, absolutely recognize that it's a polar opposite belief of the people in the room, but it is factual feedback that we've gotten over the year.
Any other questions? I make a motion to remove the face covering requirement, making it a personal choice beginning July 1.
Second.
I'd like to recommend a motion.
We have to act on this motion first. Any discussion?
So you would be able to share for discussion?
Yeah.
Yes,
Sure.
Yeah, I'd like to make the sunset period 6/22 of 21. And the reason being is, I think we had summer school as an optional thing for our students, and I think the parents that have decided that that's something that's going to happen, they should be, they can be prepared, and I understand that there's also, that you may have not heard the dialogue, but there's also dialogue going on that too, that the masks do continue, and other students may not continue as well. That's all, that's in other words, I think there's both sides in this case, and so I think
Always.
that's all I'm saying, so there's no more discussion for that.
And so you're meaning tomorrow, that would be difficult.
That would be tomorrow, it'd be implemented tomorrow, yes. That's what I'm amending it to.
So there, 100% your conversation, but it would be difficult to notify all families for tomorrow, so that if there were some parents that didn't want to send their children, that would be difficult.
The worst possible thing is that they wear an mask.
I understand that. I'm not trying to make it difficult, I understand.
I mean, a day to tell them, because
We
it's what I'm saying,
originally-
a day for family to make a plan.
I agree, we originally decided.
Excuse me, we're trying to hear with the side conversations going on. Please respect our board meeting, please. Yes, please.
We originally said that we revisited at the end of the school year, and we have. And I think, since now that we're actually going ahead and actually going to sunset it, that is our intention, no matter what the motion carries or not, as far as amending. At this point, I don't see a strong difficulty for parents to adjust, because we've had to adjust. Many people have had to adjust. I have a student, so that's why I'm we've had to adjust a lot of times to different mandates, different reasons, and also different accommodations. And the weather has changed considerably now, and I have my personal student here had some difficulty wearing masks in hot weather. And I think that it might be an opportunity for some of these students now to have a summer school without a mask. That's all.
Any other questions or comments or questions?
The only comment I would make, Troy, I understand what you're saying, but if I was a parent that believed in masks and I didn't have daycare set up for my student, I was planning for them to go to summer school the rest of the week, I think that could be a great difficulty for some people, right? So that would be a big concern for me.
Any other discussion? If there's a motion and a second, to remove the face covering requirement, making it a personal choice beginning July 1.
Can we just review Robert's Rules of Order, just so that everyone knows exactly where we stand? I'm not trying to belabor this, but I want to try to understand what would have to happen, right? So there's a motion and a second on the table, there's been some discussion. If the board votes and that motion does not pass, then the table is open for someone to make a new motion. I just wanted you to understand the process of how you would be able to make the contrary motion, so.
Does anyone have a question on the process that we're in right now? With a motion and a second, then we'd be voting on face covering requirement, removing the face covering requirement, making it a personal choice beginning July 1. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? The motion carried. And I know that our staff will have conversations with children that masks are now a personal choice, and that all people will need to respect the choice of others. The staff and the families will have that discussion with the children. Okay, thank you. Now we'll move on to gifts and grants.
So once again, the Share and Share Alike Foundation has generously donated $8,000 as they did last year. This is a semi-local organization that works through a greater foundation. So if you Google Share and Share Alike, it is not from Black River Falls or Jackson County, but they have chapters of organizations who do great work throughout the state, and they use that as their governing body. And so that money is donated each year, the last couple of years, and we are very, 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 very grateful. So $8,000 to use as we see fit. We are replacing some of the math manipulatives that we sent home a whole bunch this year, and we did not get all of them back, and so I'm positive the kids are very actively using them for math manipulatives still, but this will be helpful in replacing them.
Any questions or? I can't speak as loud as Dr. Severson. Any questions or comments? Okay.
I make a motion to accept the gifts and grants as presented.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Move on to elementary family handbook.
So Melanie Floyd and Laura Simonson and Brandon Jard, the 3 elementary principals, worked together on updating the family handbook. They used the edit feature so you could see which items were being recommended for changes from last year to this year. The beginning are really just some updates of new information, but then the rest of the document you can see, I was pleased to see that they added a lot more about behavior expectations and just lots of updates throughout. So if you have any questions specifically, Melanie is here. If you don't have questions, we would be looking for approval. Both the middle school and high school handbooks will be coming later in the summer with a new dean of students coming at the middle school and a new high school principal and assistant principal. We wanted to give them the opportunity to look through that handbook prior to bringing it to the board for approval. So those will be coming either probably July, but perhaps August. Plenty of time before they go to students and families.
Any questions?
I just have one question, Melanie. I was wondering why you moved the no end of day communication, looks like from 2 until 1. Was there a big problem with that in the past year?
More than just the past year, there has been. And,
Melanie, can you speak up, please? Everyone can hear you. Thank you.
more than just this past year, there has been, and in collaboration with Christy Sarczynski, our transportation director now, she had also requested that to be changed to 1 o'clock. Because there's quite a large pool of people we have to notify, especially when buses was involved.
I assume that was related to us, but just wondering.
Any other questions?
I got on page 12, the removing the extending the standard portion, are you guidance from us?
Oh, that was for me, and I'm sorry, I thought that I had taken that off. That
Yeah,
was
it's just missing
covered.
the questions.
Yep, sorry about that.
Sure. Then I have a question.
Asked and answered, right? That's not. Thank you for that.
Any other questions for Melanie or Dr. Severson? Okay, is there a motion to approve the elementary family handbook as presented in our packet? Brad? Your second?
Second.
Okay, any more questions or discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Move on to our people. And we have some employment.
We do have some employment. We have a tech ed teacher at the high school. Yay! We are filling some of our more challenging positions to fill. Unfortunately, there's still quite a list of others that we are in need of. The additional school psychologists and speech and language pathologists are ongoing challenges. The shortage is exorbitant throughout the state. Marty has started reaching out to other employment agencies who kind of act as a third party trying to connect districts in need with providers of those direct services. Unfortunately, they come at a higher cost when that's the case, but we are really, there is just such a significant shortage. I heard recently for every school psychologist job, every school psychologist looking for a job, there are 30 postings in the state of Wisconsin. So it is highly, highly competitive to fill those roles, and they are critically important in meeting the needs of our students that need those additional resources. So we are working on all of that, but that is our challenge. So
Does anyone have any questions or comments about the employment recommendations? Is there a motion to approve? Thank you.
Second.
And second, thank you. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. We got Mrs. Pardo with the nursing report. You don't have that in the packet, but, that's the PowerPoint loaded.
Yes. I don't know how long you're, Elizabeth, you want to grab the microphone for me? Thank you.
Hello, I'm Elizabeth Johnson. I'm the school nurse here. And this is my Elizabeth Johnson. I'm the school nurse for the district. It's been quite the year. This is our health services team. Me, I'm the school district nurse, and our medical advisor is Del Rogers from clinic. And then we have principals and nurse delegates, staff, our school secretaries, designated teachers, and the aides. Health visits. One thing that changed a little bit with COVID was I had put together a first aid kit for every single classroom, so we tried to manage all these minor injuries and I need a Band-Aid type things actually in the classrooms. But still, even with that, there were hundreds of nurse visits for more serious rashes, injuries where they call me over, and to assess a child. Also, there was a number of calls for COVID assessment as well. But injuries that were severe enough to recommend referral to a medical establishment are as follows. You can see the chart here. Obviously, we were not in schools in person in December, so that is why when they're not in the building, they didn't get hurt. Medication is a large part of school nursing. We administer daily medications for many things, including but not limited to ADHD, seizures, diabetes, chronic illness, and acute illness. We also manage emergency and over-the-counter medications. I'm always continuing to work to exercise best practice with medication forms, reconciliation of controlled medications, medication training, and storage of all medications. And I'm continuing to work to establish continuity of care by enhancing lines of communication with parents and medical providers. And for some students, at times this is an extensive collaboration, actually. As medication orders change, and sometimes providers require our assessments. So medication district-wide, our numbers are medications given to students. 1,009 students have orders for a total of 1,946 medications. 183 of these medication orders were utilized for a total of 2,369 doses of medication administered this year. There were more students actually this year with medication orders, but fewer doses given overall, but we did have fewer days in school because we had that, the virtual days, and some students have been virtual the majority of the year. We also have had fewer students in school on a daily basis due to quarantine and isolation. And also, we really restricted how much ibuprofen and Tylenol that we gave out so that we would not mask COVID symptoms. The medications given were for things like ADHD, asthma, diabetes, migraines, pain, Tylenol, ibuprofen, antibiotics, anxiety, allergies, GI issues, emergency medications, and ones for specific health conditions, both chronic and acute. A number of medication orders that are on file were not administered because they are medication orders for emergency situations like Athens and that sort of thing. Special health conditions. We have 196 students with 274 health conditions. These numbers are limited to the conditions listed in Skyward. I ran a Skyward report to get these numbers, and not all students' medical conditions are listed in there. Kind of what information is shared with us, or that parents voluntarily put in during registration time. So we have, students with diabetic cares, severe allergies, G-tube care, seizures, catheterization, there's many other health cares that we manage throughout the year. And we do have several students with severe heart conditions, blood pressure conditions, brain malformations, lung conditions, syndromes affecting the nervous system. Kind of runs the gamut. So immunizations. This year's flu clinic looked very different than previous years. We partnered with Jackson County Public Health like we have before. We did not open up the clinic to families or the community. The flu clinic was for our employees and their families. In all, we administered 274 flu vaccines to staff and families. And this number is actually not that much lower than when we have opened it up to the community before. So I don't know if it was our method of delivery or people were more anxious to get the flu vaccine, but we went to every building, and so it made it much more convenient for a lot of staff members and for their children to go to a different building too. So it was, I think a lot of it was a convenience thing as well. One issue we do have right now is that many children are behind on their vaccinations due to not going to their normal well child checkups due to COVID. Public health was not able to help us catch up immunizations in school this year too because of COVID. And we were also busy in the fall that wasn't even feasible. So for the first time, we did not meet the state mandated 99% vaccination rate. And this is true in many districts statewide. Because we did not meet the 99% vaccination rate, next year, this affects next year, if non-compliant students in kindergarten through 5th grade do not show proof of vaccination by the 30th school day, they will be excluded from school. That's according to the Wisconsin state law, and exclusion is optional in grade 6 through 12. It's kind of interesting because one of the things that always holds us back on our 99% compliance rate is that there's a Tdap vaccination that is required in 6th grade. Many people simply don't know about, and they're not taking their kids to those child checkups quite as often at that point, and so they don't know this, but then those kids actually are not mandated to be excluded. So what can we do about that? I am in the process right now of sending out letters to the currently non-compliant families, now with reminders to get their children in during the summer, because it's going to be much easier to make those appointments and get them in during the summer. I will send out mass messages during the summer to all incoming 4K kindergarten families that all the children need another round of immunizations at age 5. Mass messages to all incoming 6th grade families that all children need a Tdap booster for 6th grade. And I'm going to move immunization plans on the priority list a little bit I usually try to work on that in October, because it's usually by the 40th day of school, but we'll be working on that in August next year. And hopefully we'll be able to partner again with Jackson County Public Health to help with those immunizations too. Vision, I had to delay our vision screenings this fall due to COVID. But then this spring, when things are when our cases dropped in, I was able to secure the Scott family through the Lions Club, and so I did the screenings on 4K kindergarten, 1st, 3rd, and 5th graders. In total, I screened 408 students and sent home 65 referral letters, and that's about a 16% referral rate. So the thing with the vision screens that I see is that many of the students that are flagged do end up in glasses, and that's wonderful, because when our children can see, then that really increases their academic performance. It also can help with behaviors too. So hearing, historically I have screened all 1st, 3rd, and 5th graders using the AeroScan. The nature of this screening for using the AeroScan requires me to physically touch each child. I actually have to touch each ear on each child. And due to the COVID protocols, I struggle with seeing how that could be conducted safely. I consulted with our regional school nurse group, and everyone was in the same boat. Everyone had the same feeling. They all used the AeroScans as well. And so we all decided that it just wasn't feasible to conduct the mass screenings this year. But we did conduct hearing screenings by request or referral from teachers to our speech and language pathologists. Bridging Brighter Smiles was able to come into our schools this year utilizing the COVID protocols, which was a great thing for some of our kids in desperate need of dental care. So these are their numbers that they shared with me that they took care of in our school district. CPR and first aid is always a priority to certify coaches to meet our WIA requirements, and then working on training other staff, prioritizing building needs. I was behind on staff and coach trainings due to COVID, and we couldn't hold any classes last spring, which was a time that I often hold quite a few classes. And then the fall was more difficult as well. So we did catch a few people up in the fall, and then we held class. I held class on some Saturdays this spring, March 13th, March 20th, April 24th, and May 1st to certify 22 staff members. Those are mostly coaches. I do need to work on recertifying and certifying people on our emergency response teams. And so I'm going to coordinate with administration to prioritize their staff and do some of that training probably in August. So Project Adam Heart Safe School, this is something I've been working on for 3 years, and I was finally right at that time of like getting it all put together, and that was March of 2020, and the world shut down. So we got shelved again. I still have the dream that we will get this designation at some point. But I've done a lot of the work already. We've got cataloged AEDs, stocked for guidelines, worked with maintenance on appropriate locations, signage apps, and all that sort of thing. What the next step is really getting these cardiac emergency plans for each specified for each building, and then training the emergency response teams in the CPR, and then conducting some in-school drills that are specific to cardiac emergencies, and then doing an annual awareness training for all faculty and staff on some cardiac runs. So I would love to have this done at the beginning of the school year next year. I don't know if that will quite happen, but that's my goal. Employee health is another thing that I do as part of my job. I work with the flu shots. I do some blood pressure monitoring. I've done some wound care for employees, even on the weekends sometimes. And I've been a COVID-19 resource, a health resource, evaluate after workplace injury, and educating staff on health maintenance. And I think this year I became a lot more visible to many of our staff, and I believe as the staff members became more comfortable coming to me with health concerns. I've been continuing to follow a couple of them over the summer too, with a few things. So, yeah, so it's been kind of a good thing, and it's been nice to get to know some people better. So the pandemic plan, we had resurrected the pandemic plan, and that was initially drafted in 2009 in response to the H1N1 pandemic that we never actually ended up needing to use at that time. And we implemented that in March of 2020 when the world shut down, and then continued to use it for reopening purposes. So COVID-19 presented some very unique challenges for school nurses. Shared last year that I have some background in epidemiology and public health. That was my first bachelor's degree. So I had a pretty good understanding going in. It was actually kind of fascinating for me to watch the whole thing play out. I'm not sure everybody in the school district would use that word, but it was kind of interesting for me. So health and safety were our primary concern with students returning to school. Keeping update on new developments with this virus. That is a continual process. And continuing to attend webinars and collaborating with nurses on the regional and state level regarding return to school. Last summer, I checked temps and screened employees when we weren't quite sure whether we needed to do that, but we tried to do best practice at that time. But based on the recommendations, we did that through the summer. And then I was part of the COVID Return to School Committee planning for safe return. So I worked a lot of last summer, actually. So when we went to return to school, I we started the year with, I developed and presented an all-staff training on COVID protocols, hand washing, PPE wearing, et cetera. I worked with the trade secretaries on COVID-19 protocols and information dissemination to families, set up isolation rooms and PPE supplies, developed isolation room protocol, worked closely with Jackson County Public Health on exclusion protocols and many other things actually. And provided educational resources to staff to use in their classrooms to educate students on COVID-19 and educate them on prevention strategies, hand washing, mask wearing, that sort of thing. And I tried to anticipate and lay a framework for what contact tracing would look like when we have a positive case. So, return to school. The reality was continually changing, for one. Initially, there was a lot of education on protocols to families. I fielded a number of complaints regarding exclusion protocol and mask wearing. And I continue to remind parents, staff, and students that we get to go to school because of these protocols. And I have to say that we've got to go to school so much more than so many other districts because we have these protocols in place. And so that was the great thing about that. I got called out to all of the buildings on a regular basis to triage students that had been put in the isolation rooms. So that consisted of me donning full PPE in order to go in and assess these kids. I was constantly updating lists, reviewing test results, and that sort of thing, and had nearly daily communication with public health following new developments and changes in the guidelines. And we continually work to improve our process for contact tracing, quarantine tracking, and that sort of thing. It was definitely a process. So, the reality, our school district data on this. Quarantine students, over the course of the year, we quarantined, or public health were quarantined, 1,554 students. Now, some students got quarantined more than once. So it's not that many kids, it's that many students. Instances that they were quarantined. And my own 3 daughters were all in that number, so it affected all of us. We had 219 staff that were quarantined. We had 694 symptomatic students throughout the course of the school year. We had 209 symptomatic staff members. We had 135 positive cases in students and 59 positive cases in staff. Now, what's interesting about those numbers too is that students, 135, that represents approximately 8% of our student population. 59 positive cases in our staff, that represents 20% of our staff. So what that tells me is that our concern back last summer was exactly spot on. We were concerned about our staff. Yes, we are aware that students by and large don't get that sick from COVID, but we were very protective of our staff, and I think that was rightfully so. In terms of severity of some of our illnesses, we did have some students that were really quite sick, actually. And I guess one case that I can remember actually off the top of my head that, and I didn't even mention this in this presentation, was that one of the cases kind of sparred on we worked with Donna Jacobson, and she kind of took off running with developing a return to play protocol for students, for student athletes after they had COVID, after they tested positive for COVID. So that's kind of a big thing that we did too. But we also had some staff members that were very, very ill, and some that have long-term effects from COVID too. So this wasn't something to take lightly. So when we got to the point where we actually were notified of a positive case, we developed this whole list, and I won't go through all of it, this whole list, and it's in very tiny print, and it's like almost a page and a half, of all the steps that we had to go through every time we contact traced a case. Positive cases were mostly reported to me by Jackson County Public Health at all hours of the day, night, and weekends. So we kind of got off between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. or so. They didn't call during those hours. But other than that, we was pretty much on call. in case tracing need to start immediately because these families need to be notified to quarantine their kids or the staff members. And generally, admin and I would take the lead. It was often either Shelley, Jill, or Stephanie that would help me out. And then we'd be assisted by building administration and the secretaries making the calls. And in many cases, we were the only contact. Public health was so overwhelmed with cases last fall that they could not make, their contact tracers could not take on making all of those calls. And so we were the point of contact. So we worked with them to develop the scripts of what needed to be said to the families, clarifying dates. There was lots of clarifying dates through the year with many different families and just making it all consistent too. So, and you know, it's not just classrooms, but we extracurriculars, sports, bus, contacts, and sometimes other students that were friends, you know, that had contacts and that sort of thing. So we did lots of that. So total number of cases that we needed to contact trace within the school this year was 75. There were 3 days in late November that we contact traced 5 cases each day. It was a little bit crazy. So moving on to optimism out there is that COVID-19 vaccinations. I was the first one vaccinated in our school district because I'm a healthcare provider and they deem school nurses to be frontline workers. So I got mine back in January. On March 1st, educators became eligible for the COVID-19 vaccine. We did get some people in February because they were deemed healthcare providers within the school district, even though that wasn't their official title, but they do healthcare tasks within the school, so we were able to get them in earlier. Our closed pod plan did not become a reality, and that was kind of a frustration, I think, overall for many of us involved in that. And one of the many times that I was like, this is not how this is supposed to work, because I worked really hard on that closed pod plan, and it was pretty, and it didn't happen. But instead, we collaborated with the Ho-Chunk Nation and Jackson County Public Health to facilitate vaccinations for the staff that wanted them. And both entities did a phenomenal job of running very efficient clinics, and people were very happy. And then we worked with building administration to schedule appointments for staff so that they could manage coverage and that sort of thing. I tracked the staff interest in getting vaccinated and then the vaccination rates among the staff. And I'm very happy to say that about 80% of our 2021 staff are fully vaccinated now. So that was a real big positive. I don't know what we're going to do with that moving forward, if it's one of the unknowns of whether we'll continue to track any of that or not. Student COVID-19 vaccinations. At this time, all students ages 12 and up can be vaccinated for COVID-19. I did some coordination with Black River Memorial Hospital to fill some Pfizer vaccine appointments that they had. Actually, that was before that was open to 12 and up, but they had some Pfizer vaccine available, and they reached out to me to see if I knew any students ages 16 and up at that time that wanted to get it. So I worked with them a little bit with that. There is no indication at this time that COVID-19 will become a required school-age vaccination. I'm looking into sending out a survey to families to ascertain whether there's interest in hosting a vaccine clinic in school for ages 12 and up. The Wisconsin Department of Health has said that there's an interest form, which I filled out, but I haven't received a response in the time that they told me I would receive a response. So I'll follow up on that. I don't know if that's something that we'll end up doing or not. Kind of depends on what interest level is out there and whether it's even a possibility here. And we are currently not tracking student COVID-19 vaccinations. So moving forward, next year in COVID-19, still some unknowns. Will we be testing for COVID-19 in schools? This is something that's been thrown out there as kind of being encouraged. I'm really not clear on how that's going to look, so I'm going to let them figure it out for a few weeks and before I get into that discussion of whether that's gonna be even feasible for us to do. Will we have the same exclusion protocol? Will we be quarantining in the same way? We're not sure. Will we really even need these isolation rooms to look so specifically isolation room like they do right now? And what will our mask policy be? So those are kind of some unknowns. But what we do know is that we will not need to quarantine vaccinated staff and students. So those people will not need to be quarantined moving forward. So that is excellent news. We will still be washing our hands and promoting good hygiene, and we will still be encouraging families to keep their sick children home. And that's just sickness in general, and that is kind of a larger societal problem that we have. But we have struggled with that for years of people sending children that are really quite ill to school. And so hopefully, maybe some of that will shift. So positive reflections on a pandemic year is I've learned flexibility, resilience, and strength, and work to foster those traits in our students and staff. I think that that's one of the perspectives that I've gained is that our students right now they're experiencing their reality. It's not ours. It's not ours as school children. It's their reality, and it'll be something that they talk about in years to come. Like my dad talks about when the public pools were closed during the summer of the polio outbreak, and he talks about knowing kids in iron lungs and coming back from being sick in leg braces. And luckily, this pandemic didn't affect children in quite that way, but those are, memories that he has from back then, and our students are going to have memories, moving forward. And yes, it's going to change them, but with the flexibility and resilience that they've learned, those skills will take them pretty far in life as well. I collaborated with administration and other staff, growing those relationships and feeling a part of the team. We really were all in this together, and it was really remarkable to see so much of the school district staff really pulled together and, socially distanced, wrap their arms around each other. So that was good. I grew a strong relationship with Jackson County Public Health. I have them on speed dial, every one of them. Ho-Chunk Public Health and Clinic, Crohn Clinic, and other healthcare entities as we all work together during this. I also bonded with other school nurses in our region and state through Zoom meetings, emails, and other collaborations. Many of us are on our own in these smaller districts, and realizing that we have others to work through things has been valuable this year. It helps us not all feel like we're cowboys a little bit. So that'll be really helpful in the future as well. So collaboration with community resources, the flu shot clinic with Jackson County Public Health, all things COVID-19 with Jackson County Public Health, child development day screenings with West Dairyland and with the Lions Club, bringing brighter smiles, and vision screenings with the Lions Club. There's some committees that I'm typically involved in, some of them not so much this year, and but those are the ones that I'm kind of officially part of. So my goals for next year are to continue to adhere to guidelines for promoting the health and safety of students and staff during the COVID-19 pandemic, continuing to promote best practice in all aspects of this job, survive the challenges that COVID-19 will undoubtedly continue to present, work on getting our immunization compliance back on track, big priority for next year, achieve that Heart Safe School designation, keeps eluding me, increase health training for coaches and ensure that 504s are followed in extracurricular activities. That's something that I've been really working to make sure that I get those lists of those athletes and other activities so that everybody's properly cared for on trips and events. Continue to streamline procedure district-wide, and I'm always trying to improve my documentation as a Skyward usage. Any questions?
This is a question you may not have the answer for yet, and that's fine. So you said that vaccinated people won't have to be quarantined if they're exposed. What about somebody who's had COVID? Is there any thoughts about that?
At the moment, we are following the CDC guidelines that say that those people do not need to quarantine for 90 days post-infection.
Okay, so I was just reading an article from the National Institute of Health, and this was published in January, that they had tested people who had COVID, and even 8 months out, they had the antibodies, and so they were hoping the vaccines themselves would be just as responsive and effective as those people that had COVID. So I just wondered if, based on that information, we might be able to include them in that group.
Not until it is stated as an official guideline from the CDC, then to the Wisconsin Department of Health, and then to Jackson County. So that's how it has to be called a guideline. It can't just be a study. So.
I would just like to share with the board that Elizabeth has done absolutely outstanding work this year. She does not have that kind of extended contract, and the number of Saturday nights at 9 o'clock she was calling, stating that she had a list of 30 families to call, was just unbelievable. She has moved mountains this year, and as she said, she got her own building tomorrow and got to meet more people. This sense of humor, like in the face of, good Lord, another day I have to do this. She has just done absolutely outstanding work this year, and so I just would love to publicly recognize her for that. She really has gone above and beyond over and over this school year.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I was really pleased that some of the things that we thought possibly couldn't be happening were actually happening. The Bridging the Brighter Smiles was one of those that I know kids weren't meeting with a dentist, they weren't taking appointments, and awesome that you were able to work that in.
Yeah, they had come to schools with a plan, and yeah, so I'm glad that they were able to do some of that. So
I got that written down. I was going to ask about it, is that going to continue? And I'm just so happy to see that you were able to do so very much.
Yeah, and I would say another positive too is that I think saw a lot fewer cases of general sickness overall. You know, it's like I can't remember the last time I had a cold, you know, because of our mitigation measures and in school, and we saw flu was way down this year everywhere, and I sort of suspect that our cases of lice actually went down too. So there have been, definitely some positives too.
Okay, any more questions or comments for Elizabeth? Thank you again. Thank you. We'll move on to our student success and achievement gap reduction.
So if you recall that we're going to do the not very pretty form first that has to be returned to DPI, the achievement gap reduction, and Melanie's going to speak to that first, and then both Nicole and Melanie and I will talk through our end of year student growth data. Very briefly.
I don't know if you guys have seen that of the Word document, that's what they want us to turn in. And so that just really outlines all of our goals, the strategies that we're using, that right there. And then our progress throughout the year with the updated. And so this is the form that will turn into DPI. And just a quick reminder of some of the strategies that we the AGR stands for Achievement Gap Reduction, and it gives us a couple strategies that we can use, one of them being class size reduction, another one being coaching, and another one being one-on-one tutoring. This year, we have used, remember, we did instructional coaching throughout all of our grade levels, at forestry and at red creek. And then for forestry, we are using the 18:1 class size reduction. For first grade, it happened to apply, so we can select that one as well. We have to choose at least one strategy in order to qualify for AGR funds. So just a quick reminder of our goals that we had. So we had 3 goals, 2 for math and 1 for reading. And our first math goal was to increase the percentage of students that are at or above grade level. And then the second one was just to move the number of students in that growth towards their growth goal. And then for reading, we wanted at least 55% of our students to meet the assessment criteria for this DIBELS assessment. As a reminder, this was the first year that we used this DIBELS assessment, so it's kind of new for all of us, but it really gets at the heart of the foundational skills that of reading that our kids should have when they leave forestry. And so we wanted 55% of our students at least to be on or above grade level by the end of the school year. And we have some phenomenal data that we're really excited to share with you.
I think the PowerPoint.
Yeah. Do you have any questions on the reform?
So it's kind of going to be all three of us. Take two. Nicole, if you would stand for a moment. I don't know that the full board has been, and the committee have been introduced to you. Nicole Sullivan is our new Director of Curriculum and Instruction and Assessment. She'll be taking over for Stephanie Bergen as Stephanie sunsets her career with us next week. So welcome to Nicole, and she gets to jump in on a high note, so that's good. So I just wanted to remind the board that last spring, when we first started talking about our data dashboard, we talked about the difference between leading data and lagging data, right? Lagging is that one time a year state test that, hope the kid's having a great day, they take the test, and then we wait like 7 months before we find out the results of that test. Maybe that's an exaggeration. For sure, 5 or 6 months before we find out the results of that information. That's definitely considered lagging because you can't respond to that very quickly. They take it in spring and we don't get the results until October or November. If we wait until then to figure out how the kids are doing, we are really, really missing the boat there. So that is why we always talk about some leading measures that you see on a much more regular basis, and that is that I-Ready assessment that we give. There's just some examples to remind you about leading indicators versus lagging indicators. And it is very important to have both, right? Because if all of your leading indicators keep moving in the same direction, eventually those lagging measures are going to get there. It's just very seldom that you see a drastic movement in those lagging measures because, again, one day, take the test, 5 months later, you find out how that student did on that. So the difference between the leading and the lagging. And the other piece is that we keep talking about growth measures. So there's really 2 ways to measure achievement, and I certainly don't mean to be insulting. I just want to make sure we all understand that we're really looking at it 2 different ways. When you measure achievement by, here's the grade level expectation, you're kind of drawing a line in the sand and saying X percentage of students are going to meet that bar. And so you will have some above and some below that bar, and that is the line in the sand achievement. The other way to measure that is growth, and every single student can be expected to reach their appropriate growth goals for the year. Our I-Ready assessment, like our STAR assessment used to do, based on the grade level a student is, the age they are, and when they sit down to take that test, whatever they score at, their growth goal may be very different than another student in that same class. Their growth is based off of where they currently are right now. So a student who starts off significantly below grade level is expected to grow more than somebody who is already at the top because that window is a lot smaller. If you're already well above grade level, you don't grow as fast, but growth is the expectation for all students. So we set a percentage of students that we expect to meet their individual growth goal. So just want to remind you, line in the sand, at or above proficiency, percentage of students meeting their individual growth goals. 2 separate ways to measure achievement, and we're going to take it away with the charts.
So I am going to jump here. So this is kindergarten. This was our number of students who are proficient. And so at the beginning of the school year, we started with 20% or above grade level proficiency in math. And at the end of the year, and our goal was to get to 40%, we bumped them up to 58%. So we exceeded our goal by 18% on that one. It's very exciting to see. And then for kindergarten growth, this is the one that we wanted our students to not only meet their goal, but grow. And this one, we started the year along, let me back here a second. So that growth the first determination of marker is established at the midyear because you need 2 tests in order to establish that growth goal. And so at the midyear mark, we had 21% of our students that were at or above proficiency or at meeting their goal, And at the end of the year, we were at 43%. We were just shy, but when you look at those numbers, but when you look at those numbers, all of our kiddos shifted over to the right, which is what we like. So we're hopeful that next year that not only can we meet that goal, but exceed it. So there's lots of good things happening. And in first grade, the same sort of trajectory happened as well. So 13% of our students were proficient in math at the beginning of the school year on or above grade level. At the end of the year, our goal was 33, and we exceeded that and met that at 38%. And growth, we went from 18% of our students meeting 100% or 80% or more of their typical growth goal at midyear. Our goal was to have at least 50% of our students do that. We went from 18% to 40%, and that's a huge jump. Yes, we didn't meet our goal, but we certainly had a lot of good growth. And again, when you look at the percentages of students, they're all shifting over to the right. And we were able to dig into that data and see exactly which students with R, and they are so it's exciting. And then for reading, this is that difficult assessment. We're looking at the foundational skills of reading. So we started off in kindergarten having 26% of our students at or above grade level. At the end of the year, our goal was 55%, and we ended with 85% of our students at or above grade level. And when you look at that last chart on the right, I'm so proud of the work that our teachers did with our students, that most of our kiddos are not even at grade level, they're above grade level in this area, which is so exciting to see. And I really want to stress that this isn't a curriculum. I mean, this is lots of good pieces coming together. This is good instructional practices, this is good professional learning community working, that they're digging in together and diving into problems and talking about data and looking at it and adjusting their instructional practices along the way. So it is the work that the teachers are doing that's really helping drive these needs. So exciting stuff. In first grade, we started with 22% of our students at or above grade level. And at the end of the year, our goal was 55%. And again, we overshot that and went to 81%. And same thing, that 50% of our kiddos are in that above grade level mark. Not just at the board, but above the grade level. So really exciting stuff.
You don't mind? You're on a roll? Okay, we'll play it together. How about that? The Red Creek administrators were not able to be here tonight, and so we got it. You know how to read the charts by now, right? So we can quickly move. This is second grade reading, and it started at 13%, all the way up to 45% by the end of the year. It is when we hear about all of the challenges that this past year created, there is some really fantastic information coming out. And so if you think about Elizabeth's comment that there was fewer kids in school physically, and yet the growth overall was higher than growth that we've seen in previous years. So it's a story that keeps repeating itself. So, and there's their growth rate from, they had 71% of their students at the end of second grade reach their growth. And second grade math started at 7% at or above grade level and ended at 33%. And I'm sorry, go back one time. Not only the proficient, but look at the red. That is students that are 2 or more grade levels below. How small that red grew by the end. When we talk about our multi-level systems of support, the idea is that 80 to 85% are supposed to be getting their needs met by core instruction in the classroom, and the red should be down to 15 to 20%. So sitting at 16 students is absolutely fantastic.
14%. That's a pretty low number up there. This one is their growth goal for second grade math, and they went from 33% that winter. Their goal was 50%, and they exceeded that. They shot to 64%, so they were 14% above, or 14 points above the goal. Third grade for reading. And just a note on this, Red Creek uses just the iReady assessments. They started off with their baseline was 31%, and at the end of the year, they went to 51%, met their goal. We're done with money. For their growth goal, they started at 32% at mid-year and ended at 52%, which was 2 points above their goal. Third grade math, they went from 13% to 51%, 18 points above their goal. For the third grade math goal, they went from 17 to 52%, so again, 2 points above their goal. Fourth grade math went from 21% to 36%. They just were shy of that goal, but again, when you look at those numbers, those pie charts are moving in the right direction. So fourth grade, they started at 48% in mid-year, and at the end of the year, they ended at 58% of their students missing the orange bar and arrow, but that is 8 points above their goal. And fourth grade math started from 14% and went to 39% at the end of the year, which was 5 points above their goal. Fourth grade math growth goal, they went from 24% to 60%, which was 10 points above their goal. And fifth grade reading went from 19% to 31%, just shy of their goal, 8 points below that one. And for fifth grade reading growth goal, they went from 49% to 72%, 22 points above the goal. And just a note on that one, that just shows that while they didn't meet their proficiency goal, all of those kids are growing. And for fifth grade math, they went from 17% up to 37% at the end of the year, and then their goal was really fine. For fifth grade math growth goal, they went from 29% to 68%. That's a whole 18 points above their end of the year goal. For reading, overall, as a school, they went from 21% to 41%, which was exactly their goal for this year. And for growth, they went from 40% to 58% overall, which is 8 points above their goal. For math, they went from 13 to 40% overall, which again is 7 points above their goal. For growth for math, they went from 26% to 57%, which was 7 points above the goal.
So I just wanted to point out that the iReady exam is very different from the STAR exam that we used to give. This, if you've been following board business for several years, we used to talk very heavily about the Renaissance scores, the STAR reading, STAR math, all those assessments. And we would watch this growth happen all school year, and then we would do our state test, and the results would come back and they'd be very, very, very different than what our STAR test. That was a big part of our decision making in moving to the iReady, because the iReady exam is supposed to be higher rigor and is supposed to be more closely aligned to the outcomes from the forward. And so scores that we're seeing here are larger growth, larger percentages of kids at or above grade level, and on the more rigorous assessment. And so Red Creek is very excited. If you remember, they were 0.5 away from being exceeds expectations. They kept that in their sights all year when we didn't get school report cards, and they're anxious to see what the Wisconsin board exams are going to show them this fall. So the other piece I would add before we move to middle school, perhaps those of you that have been watching board business for years recognize that there's always been a lot of growth at the elementary level, and then the middle school tends to get a little bit more stagnant. I can't wait for Nicole to walk you through the middle school data, because that story is changing, which is absolutely fantastic. And she won't say it. She was the instructional coach at the middle school this year. Mr. Nortman is very quick to say, Nicole was there and did great work. And I would say that Mr. Nortman and the team of Mr. Nortman and Mrs. Sullivan have done just fantastic, fantastic work this year. So,
I have a quick question before you go on. Two questions. How did you accomplish testing the kids that were at home? Was the first question, and then what would you attribute? I'm thrilled with the success. First of all, is it that new CKLA program? I think it's called.
It is CKLA, yes. So I don't think think it's just a curriculum, I think it's so much more than that when we look, and I have to note, so we also exceeded our goals, in math as well, we didn't change our curriculum. So it can't be attributed to that, it's got to be the work that the teachers are doing together, that they're digging into, and a huge piece, I have to give a big kudos to Dr. Sullivan too, because she really helped us understand those assessments, understand how to teach the science of reading, and how to really adjust our instructional practices to get at those core skills that those students really need to become a successful reader. So I think that's a small part of it, but.
And how did you do the testing for the at-home kids?
Yeah, thank you. So the virtual kiddos, so our virtual teachers set up small group times in the afternoon, and when assessments rolled around for when it was time for them, we did them one-on-one with kiddos. Some areas that were great, those students didn't show up for their times, and so we've got just a very small handful, I want to say like maybe 5 kids that did not complete their assessment. But for the most part, the vast majority of our kiddos showed up and did that assessment one-on-one virtually with the teacher.
And the Wisconsin Forward exam, we invited all kids in because we couldn't send those home. And we had a pretty high participation rate of families bringing in their at-home learning students for the Wisconsin Forward exam as well. So that was good.
Yeah, and that was, so what I was referring to was sort of double because that's administered by a teacher. The iReady assessments, I believe I can see for Laura, I might be wrong on this one, but we just set aside the window and said this is the time and told parents these are best practices for administering it, but the kids just log in and do 20 to 30 minutes of that assessment and then sign off and then come back to it the next day.
I just wanted to add one point to your question, Mary Jo, what I would attribute or what we might attribute some of the growth goals and some of the growth achievement that we're seeing right now is as a district we do professional development and a lot of learning about self-efficacy. And so we don't have hard data to prove that at this point, but I would say the practices that we put in place around self-efficacy and goal setting, those soft skills are just as important sometimes as the other pieces. So I think that is a piece of the puzzle. I think there's many different factors, but for sure that is part of it. So at the middle school, as we were talking, I wanted to just remind you of our conversation about reading indicators and liking indicators. So as we go through, I'm just going to talk more in trends as we go through, and I'll let you kind of probably end up putting up the numbers because I won't be able to help myself, but I'll try to speak less than how much. I just really love data. All right, so if we go to the next slide. So again, these pie charts represent grade level data. So this has to take 3 times a year, fall and spring, and this is 6th grade reading, and this is where we were for that benchmark assessment. So we go to the next slide. And then you can see where we are in the achievement. And one trend that's different between the middle school and the elementary schools with these typical growth slides is that our blue lines on the outsides, the far right is showing us these kids are really making growth, and the far left shows they're really not. So at the middle school level, they're either making the growth or they're not. And so that's something that we really want to be looking at. So when you look at the far left, we went there at 41% in that far left to 34, and that's just as big a deal as all those kids that we're seeing moving far to the right. So this, I won't talk more about that, but please note that as we go through. So we go to the next slide. Thank you for doing that. I would have been okay, so here, math is the big story. I'm told, and as we look at historical data, growth in math has been an issue and something that the district has worked really hard at. So here we have 24% growth in the middle school. This hasn't been the story in the past. So it's really exciting to see that show up in the benchmark place, because that does, even though it's still leading data, it's a little bit slower than the growth that we'll see. So if we go to the next slide. This is a really big deal as well in math, the fact that we have 70% of the students in the middle school in 6th grade meeting their typical growth goal. So it deserves an increase, but that's a lot of our students making the progress that they should. 7th grade reading, again, this is our benchmark. So there is a trend going where we would like to see.
And so when we go to math, or go to the next, or this slide, this is the slide we want. Again, notice the outlining slides. I can't help myself, but on the far left, the 41% down to the 28%, that's a very big deal. And then the overall idea in reading that we're at that 64%, we're approaching 70, which is what we're looking for in the district. So then we go to math in 7th grade. Again, math is super exciting at the middle school this year with these numbers. We're not satisfied with that 33%. I don't want to lead anyone wrong or not. I like that. We're not satisfied with that. We want that to keep moving. But the data is showing us that the things that we're putting in place and the things that we're doing are moving us in the right direction. So if we go to the next slide, that 59%, again, is a good indicator of change. Again, that left side data, 40% to 25%. We're keeping moving those kids that are struggling the most forward, and that's a really big deal and really hard to do as kids get older. 8th grade. Numbers, and then 63% are 8th grade reading now. 63% made the goal. And then math in 8th grade is a big story as well. As far as we got 63% moved over. So, and then on the next two slides, well, actually, no, this is overall. Go ahead. Yep, thank you. Overall, in reading, there's that increase as a whole middle school has moved reading from 27% of students at level to 37%. And then in math, or this is the overall growth for reading. So 60% of students at the middle school have met their growth goal, which is wonderful. And then the next one is math. We are showing that's a big increase overall, 20% increase from 20 to 40% in this school year. I just think that's pretty impressive. And then this is a really big story as well. As we're approaching that 7% as a middle school of students being at meeting their typical growth. They're doing strong work and collaborating together. And again, I'd like to say, I think at the middle school, especially in math, so a lot of this growth can be attributed to what I was talking about earlier with these self-efficacy practices. Many of the middle school teams really grabbed hold of this idea that students should have individual goals, so they're looking at their own performance and then setting goals, and teachers are really supporting them, setting goals and moving forward and tracking how they were doing. In addition, they worked as teams, as a class, and set a class goal of what they wanted to do with their kind of like a homeroom class, how they were going to move forward. So this chart is it's going through K through 11. On the very far right, that is showing our spring state assessment data and what the averages are. And then there's a spring state assessment from 17-18 on the far left. So if you look at the column here, it says Spring Universal Screener in the 20 to 20, this one here in the 20 to 21. I just wanted to highlight for you 3rd grade. You go across, they're at 51%. And if you go across to here, they're outperforming the state average, and that's exciting. And so then if we go to math, this is the same chart. Far right is your spring state assessment. Our screeners across the middle. And 3rd grade again, look at them with that 51. And they're right at the top of the spring sets, the average. And then I'd also like to point out 8th grade. 8th grade is this 33, and 6th grade is the 41. And they are just approaching that 44. They're within 2 and 3 points of the state average. And that's our first goal, is that we want to be hitting those state spring assessment averages. So that is the end of the report. If there are any questions.
I have one question.
Yes.
I think the direction this is going is a very good direction for everyone here. And you attributed that to several things for this school year, even though we had a lot of virtual instruction and everything. And also the new direction that the professional development is going in as far as how communication is open. Do you see that that is actually something you're trying to continue on from next year, even though we don't have the same circumstances?
Yes, we are, for sure. It's not going away. I don't think it ever will. Like, it's really important stuff, so I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's fine. No, and I had another question too. It's just the growth rates I think are really commendable. I just was curious, and the last two slides showed basically the averages for everyone. Is that the state actually doesn't measure as far as report card comes when DPI comes in? They don't look at the growth rates, is that correct? They just look at what the actual numbers are? I just wanted to, that's here's how it works.
The state report card gives us a couple different data points. One of them is that line in the sand and how many of your students are reaching it, but then they do a growth. You get separate points. High school is the only one that doesn't have a growth because it's just based on the ACT, and so it's only one assessment, they can't do growth. But all the other grade levels also get a growth. And there's also a closing of the gap. So your achievement scores in ELA and math actually hit you on 3 different scoring points on that state report card.
Thank you, that's all I have.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Kind of nice to be looking forward to getting those other tests back, you know? Other years, it's marvelous that we're going the right direction. I'm thrilled.
I have to give, and I should have said this when I introduced Nicole, I apologize. Nicole recently has earned the title of Dr. Sullivan, so congratulations to Nicole. That's a monumental award. Absolutely. Dr. Sullivan and Vicki Kramer, our Title I specialist, district reading specialist, the two of those ladies together have brought this conversation about the science of reading, and it is amazing stuff. We're not just talking phonemic awareness, we're not talking literacy collaborative anymore, we're talking about the science of reading, and it is amazing to dig into. Vicki started sending me videos to watch, and it's just this scientific way to look at this kid is below, but what are we going to do? Put all the kids in the same intervention? Nope, we can use some decoding skills to figure out what they missed, even if it was 3 years ago, and fill that hole and then watch them grow even faster. And so many of the staff have dug into that, and it's kind of a beautiful thing. The Orton Gillingham training is very heavily touted for students who suffer with dyslexia. And while we don't diagnose dyslexia, we don't any of those things, that's a medical diagnosis, that training is super helpful when working with the science of reading. And that started from a couple of teachers who had the training and came back and said, this is awesome, can we all do this? And so it started from the group that found it, loved it, and shared it with their friends. And we've got a lot of teachers that are using these ESSER funds to grow their toolboxes in that area. So there's just a lot of enthusiasm driven from staff about feeling better about their efficacy in the classroom, and that's super exciting.
Thank you, Lily. Do we need to have a motion to approve the achievement gap reduction report to be Any more discussion on the report? All in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carried. Move on to, we received the Jay Whiteman's report on sports participation.
It doesn't need any,
No, it just
approval, just for your information.
Any questions on that? Okay.
One question on that, Shelley. Do we track, I see it's all athletics, do we track any?
So this year, very few of our clubs performed, like the music track, like musical and FBLA and FCCLA and all of those things. Very few clubs had any of their external events this year, and so normally we do, but this year that was not possible. And the other thing before we move off of here, I would just want to recognize that for the first time in a lot of years, our golf team, as an entire team, got to go represent the Tigers at the state tournament. And Mikey Antonelli was the number 3 golfer in the whole state in our division. And so good for them in this very weird year for them to qualify to compete as a whole team, and then to have somebody place out of the whole state. That was pretty exceptional of them. So congrats to them.
I saw also Matt Becker is going on to state.
Yes, thank you very much. I forgot I saw that email today. Yes, we also have a track athlete that earned the individual right. Matt Becker will be competing at the state track and field meet coming up this weekend.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion on the report today?
I think we also had intermediate team for shooting tigers place at state for sporting clubs.
They did, fantastic.
We did a third.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Jack, Harker placed second at state as an individual.
And was on the state golf team. Look at him go, right? That's awesome. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to finance and facilities. We have, monthly expenditures are in your packet. Is there anything that you want to have discussion on? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve? So moved.
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Facility update?
The only update that I have for you is that we are very near 100% completion on the construction documents, which means that they're very close to ready to send out to bids, and so that's exciting. Right now, we have a temporary date of July 22nd set aside for bid opening. Jill and I will actually be going to Myron in Neenah for that meeting and be there for the large opening of those packages. If you recall, the only piece that's been pulled out right now is the high school boiler. That work, because they're actively engaged in that work right now. That's why summer school all moved over here. All of the rest of the stages will come out in that next bid package. So that means by August, we'll know where we stand in our budget and the bottom line. We got some great news. At first, we were very worried about the ability to get the steel trusses for the addition at the high school. There was some initial conversation that February was as soon as we could get them, and we just learned last week that we are scheduled for end of October, early November, end of October, early November, that we will have our steel trusses, and that's because we got in line just before that next person, and so that is really, really exciting, because I was concerned about there's so many stages to it that is the new part, the fine arts and recording studio and that stuff on the end. If that wasn't ready in the beginning of summer for the people to move into, we couldn't do the remodel on where the current choir and band rooms are, or the current face room that we have to do during the summertime because they're using those spaces during the school year. So it's very important that the addition is done at the end of the school year so that people can move there and the rest of the internal work can happen. So that was very exciting to hear that.
They're working a lot on the transportation.
Yeah, that's separate from referendum, just for everyone's clarity, but definitely have kicked in at the transportation. That's another big piece that we need our buses all out of the current location in time for them to do the staging for all of the construction. So we've got kind of this timeline that the new site has to be ready so that by early August, so that we can do all of the staging of the equipment and so forth at the high school site. So Fire Construction has been doing that work locally, and again, outside of the referendum funds, but it definitely has interplay with the referendum project because of the timeline.
Any questions on the facility update? We'll move on to ESSER fund recommendation. Also in your packet.
So there are pieces of this that we brought to the board early as we knew about ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 possibilities. I will tell you that a little bit of heart stoppage when there was some very real conversation in our state that ESSER 3 was not going to be a possibility. But again, the Joint Finance Committee has taken their move with the state biennium budget. That doesn't mean that the whole process is complete, but we feel like we know a lot more now than we did last week prior to them taking that action. Our big unknown was whether their movement on the state biennium budget was going to meet the federal requirements for a maintenance of effort expenditure. And if the state set aside enough money to meet maintenance of effort in K-12 public education, then the state was eligible for ESSER funds. So this has always been about whether the state is eligible to receive them based off the allocation to K-12s in the biennium budget. And Jill's going to talk more about the clarity of how that happened when we get to that next piece, because that is really more connected to our annual budget as opposed to our ESSER funds. So long and short of it is, we believe that ESSER funds are likely to happen, and so therefore we're ready to share with you our full recommendation. So we already approved the interventionists and the instructional coaches. Hopefully you heard from the presentation
that you just heard that there's an awful lot of great work happening with the teachers and building their toolboxes, and those instructional coaches are a big part of that, as well as the interventionists. When we get down to just that 15% of students not meeting expectations, it's fantastic to have additional resources to be able to rally around those kids and help try to grow their toolboxes. So those two pieces you've already done. If we're hiring more interventionists, we need some intervention resources. So we need, while it is all about the instruction, they do need some tools and resources. So what you see up here, the pink column, is the total across multiple years. What we believe is that ESSER 2 funds are available for 2 years, 21-22 and 22-23, and then the ESSER 3 funds extended to 23-24. So what Jill has mapped out for you is the pink column is the total cost of that recommendation over the course of those 3 years, and then the expenditures that you see printed down there outside of that are which year they would come out of which fund, because of course we are required to submit a budget for each one of those pieces separately to talk through. Okay, so then we get to the mental health navigator. You will see that it is $0 in 21-22 initially, but we have it over in ESSER 3. We did apply for that grant again. Our hope is that we are successful with that mental health grant, and then 0 ESSER funds would come out of here. We just did not keep a placeholder for that position in our Fund 10 budget at this time because we had the flexibility. Unfortunately, that grant cycle runs, it was due in June, and it comes back in August, which is extremely messy for school finance to not know until August whether you received the grant, but both Stephanie Brigham and Amy Hunter worked on it, and so we are very hopeful that we are successful. Summer school transportation, so over the course of the lifetime that we've been offering summer school, we sometimes offer transportation, sometimes not. We stopped offering it because A, it's expensive, and we have a huge square mileage district to try to provide transportation for, and B, it was always very underutilized. Like a big bus would drive around for 45 minutes and pick up 2 students. This year, because we have such huge increased numbers of participation in summer school, the buses are being utilized much more regularly. So that's excellent, right? We're all about getting kids there where the instruction is happening, but it didn't make sense to keep paying for buses to drive around the county without anybody getting on them. So participation has been very good so far this summer. After school program, you may recall that we used to be the recipients of a 21st Century grant that provided for our last after school program. We were not successful with our last renewal of that grant, and the state has said they are not offering 21st Century grants this coming year. And so we feel like there is a great need for families to have a resource after school to help get all that homework out of the way, a snack, a little social time, a little enrichment kind of stuff before going home, so that when the parents are done with work, they don't also have to do the homework battle, that can be taken care of. So what we're talking about is K through 5, it would be homework help, it would be enrichment, and it would be some fun things and community building at those levels. And then middle school, high school would probably look a little bit more like tutoring, perhaps peer tutoring. What I'm most excited about is when we had the GLASS program, we had a lot of high school students who were interested in going into education that worked as aides at that GLASS program. And the elementary kids loved having a high school buddy that was kind of their mentor and their teacher. And since we've lost the opportunity to do that after school programming, those high school students interested in going into education haven't had those opportunities. And so that is definitely part of our plan, that we will pay some licensed teaching staff to be here, but we will also utilize high school tutors for that program. The next one is the virtual program. As we've talked about before, we are not interested in running a pre-K-12 virtual school anymore. That was out of necessity, not out of a passion for virtual education. And so, but we do realize that there are some families who their children have some significant health concerns, and they will not be comfortable sending their children next year. And so part of the communication out to families about what our early plans are for next year is that virtual programming will not be a choice pre-K through 8. And if they are interested in virtual, we have to have a real conversation about individualized health plan. There has to be a reason that they can't come to school. Just saying, I don't want to, I would rather go virtual. we don't offer virtual programming. So for those students who have an individualized health plan that they need services from school, we are going to buy seats in somebody else's virtual school as opposed to asking our staff to do both of them for another year. So that is our plan. At the high school level, we've always had a mechanism in place for students who are successful taking virtual classes. They have to have I think it's like a 2.5 or a 3.0 GPA. They have to have demonstrated success in another virtual class. And if they've done those, then we will buy slots for those virtual classes as we have in the past. And so this past year, there was no criteria to be able to go virtual. Anybody who said, I don't want to send my child, had that opportunity. We are not interested in providing that because there were some kids who were wildly successful virtually, fantastic. Our new decision-making will still allow for them to be virtual because they've demonstrated success. There were students who did not engage very aggressively during the school year at all, and because of the pandemic, we didn't have a leg to stand on to say, you need to physically come back into the building. So if they have not been successful virtually, there has to be some kind of a individualized health plan to tell us why they would still be virtual as opposed to being open for all. Not to jump ahead, but when I get to district admin report, that is communication I plan to put out to families either end of this week, now that we know about the mask, that's what I've been waiting for. Now that we know the decision about the masks, I want to tell all families that for next fall and the virtual so that if they really think their child needs an individualized health plan, we can get that process started as opposed to waiting until September 1st and people being frustrated and disappointed and unsure what's going to happen. So all of that off of virtual programming here. Curricular materials, as I mentioned before, that gift that we received is going to go a long way, but we sent out an awful lot of instructional materials this year, and we got the majority of them back, but certainly not all. And so we need some textbook replacement, and some families moved, and all of that. The floating subs, that was something that, the process that evolved this school year that really worked out very well. As the middle school and high school teachers have most of their content in Canvas, students can access that content without the teacher necessarily being there. The teachers recorded themselves, uploaded the videos, all of that stuff. So this year when we were very, very, very short substitutes and short staff, one substitute could take like 3 classrooms of middle school kids in the LGI, and they use their earbuds, and they can all do their individual classes under the supervision of one adult. The same happened at the high school in the Commons, that one adult could take the place of like 3 subs for the day. And so that was something that we started because of COVID, but it's a significant financial savings to us because we don't need the number of daily subs plus the elementary benefits because we only have, a sub pool this big, and if we don't need daily subs at the middle school and high school, those people are available for the elementary where we do need daily subs because it's just not feasible to do that same thing at the elementary level where you need a teacher in each one of those classrooms. So that is to continue with a floating sub for the middle school and high school that they attend every single day, and they just cover for whatever teachers are out that day. Your Gilliam training, I just talked to you a little bit about that. That is the science of reading work in action, and that is the cost for teachers to access that new learning. Instructional coaching materials, as we talked about on top, we've increased the number of instructional coaches, and so they need resources to lead professional development and to do their work. The iReady intervention, so iReady is the assessment that we just selected as the data for, but iReady has another component that each student takes that assessment and it decides what their best next steps are for practice. So again, mine might look different than Mary Jo's because of where we scored and our age and all that stuff. It's expensive, and so iReady turned it on for free last spring for all school districts as we know everybody's home, we know this is hard, here, take this for free. It has also been free. They extended them for this whole school year, and the teachers are loving it because when the kids do get some computer time, many of them are logging into those interventions that are targeted right at their next best steps, and they're utilizing those. And so since ESSER funds are available, we are suggesting that we allow that possibility to continue. Special education interventions, self-explanatory. There is a math training and train the trainer that Tara Presswood is working through over at Forest Street, and that is, she's really been driving some of that math conversation at Forest Street as well, and so she's going to become trained to train others, kind of that grow your own, so that we don't always have to send people out, that we would have people here. And I will tell you, she was one that asked to be able to do this. This was not something that we asked of her, so. Number 15 is the forestry behavior interventionist. So that's a large price tag, but we are talking about a full-time staff member for 3 years. So when we look at the behavior challenges that we have at our early learning center, there's 2 really significant factors at play. The first one is that our very youngest children are the ones that don't have the biggest toolboxes for managing outbursts, right? And so it's not necessarily because they're naughty, but because small kids don't have that toolbox of self-regulation. And so when there is a behavior outburst at forestry, it often is a growing, slamming, you know, it's big and needs resources to try to help that child transition back to something where they can be more successful. So that's one part of the problem. The other part of the problem is that that building, because it is our early learning center, has the smallest number of special education identified students, because we don't often refer students when they are that young. We typically wait and see, boy, there's a little bit more school, a little bit more growth, a little bit more maturity, right? We work with the families to say, you know, this is moving forward, this part we're still concerned about. And so it takes a couple years to figure out if it truly is a disability or if it is just a maturity thing, and working together with the family that we can work through that and would not necessarily qualify for a disability. So by the time kids get to 2nd grade, certainly by the time they get to 6th grade or up to the high school, more of that identification of a true disability has happened because there's been so much time that's passed. Whereas at forestry, they're so new that we don't necessarily know if it's going to form a true disability or not. So they have a fraction of the special education staff that all the other buildings have. And thus, when these explosive behaviors happen, there are fewer people that can respond and try to coach and teach the students. And so the idea of a behavior interventionist is to help the students that are having those outbursts, but also to coach some of our teachers, because when you are a brand new teacher, you don't expect a kindergartner to behave in the way some kindergartners behave when they're at school. And so helping to build those teachers' capacity as well to be able to more positively manage those behaviors. So that was the forestry piece. The middle school teachers, just as a reminder, this year, in order to keep our class sizes down, we added a 6th, a 7th, and an 8th grade teacher out of our CARES money last year, so that we could have our middle school kids cohort throughout the day and still maintain. There was 18, sometimes it got up to 20 by the end of the year. More kids were coming back in, so it got a little bit higher than that. But our case rates were so much better, it wasn't that big of a deal. So there are 6 teachers at each grade level. So that serves 2 big purposes again. And I know this is getting complicated and long, and just trying to give you some rationale behind it. So at the middle school level, the teachers have that same Friday PLC time. But when there are 5 teachers on a team, I may teach science for 2 periods of the day, and then I teach math for 2 periods of the day. I have one Friday PLC. Am I going to science, or am I going to math? So like the whole building math people can't all be together. And we just heard that a lot of that growth happened because of the very targeted conversations and co-planning and all the stuff that happens during PLCs. So the lack of PLC structure has been an ongoing challenge there. The other is that as the content ramps up in difficulty, we have teachers teaching both ELA and math, and those are both big block courses. And so, you know, there's this bridge between elementary, where teachers are jacks of all trades, right? They teach all the content areas. And then high school, right around the corner, they actually need a license to teach science, or you can't teach science. Middle school is this weird in-between spot where they can be elementary certified, or they can be high school certified. And so some can only teach one content area, some can teach multiple. It just is really, really unique. And so in an effort to increase the rigor of their PLC conversations and their instructional coaching, we are recommending that we keep the class sizes small. For this coming year, we keep 6 teachers at 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, but then because of enrollment, the following year, there would be 6 teachers at 7th grade and 8th grade, not 6th. And then because of enrollment that last year, that's why the cost changes over the years, we would keep a 6th teacher at 8th grade and not the other 2 levels because the classes coming in are smaller. So a lot of conversation, but the part of it is elementary, we try to keep class sizes to 20 for K3, and then at middle school, they've jumped up to 30, and that's just not equitable. And while we had the opportunity, we decided to prioritize that. All right, then consultants for instructional and behavioral coaching. So we have a couple people who are just fantastic at training coaches. It's called, I can't think of it now. Oh, impactful coaching, sorry, I couldn't think of it. And they help with how to have conversations that can sometimes be difficult and helping people reflect and be ready to move forward. And we need, if we're gonna put somebody in a coaching role, we have to make sure that they have the skills to feel successful in that and to interact with others. The other one is the community connections person, family education coordinator. So we have talked about, as a board before, the partnership that we have started with the servant-led community group, but deciding in all of our behavior conversations we had throughout the district back in January of 2020, which feels like an eternity ago, there was so much discussion about the need to have some instructional resources for families. Like when a student is, well, like take a forestry student who doesn't have the toolbox yet to self-regulate, we talk to the parents. Many times the parents will say, I don't know what to do about it. And so the idea of having a person who can coordinate trainings and optional, families that want to, would be fantastic. We've heard lots of great success about the Strengthening Families curriculum. That could be something that this person helps to coordinate, and the board could use that as a tool when faced with an expulsion. If the student and family are willing to engage in the Strengthening Families, perhaps that impacts their expulsion. So looking for some proactive resources for our community to help grow those toolboxes. And then the last one was after-school transportation. Kind of that same idea as summer school. We put it on there because we don't want transportation to be the barrier between students getting the help that they need after school, whether that be middle school and high school after tutoring, or whether it be the elementary age students. And it fit in just at the end of the budget to give that a shot. And that was one that we thought, you know, let's put a pool of dollars in there and let's just see if it's being taken advantage of, and if it's not being utilized, we certainly aren't going to throw good money after that. So that whole list was generated after district-wide requests for ideas. Many of those came from staff members or from teams, and it just really has been a really large group that has been talking about what is our best way to serve our students and families. Because it is the after effects of COVID, we really wanted to talk about not just how can we help students in front of us for the next 3 years, but how can we also grow our organization so that when these one-time dollars go away, we have a higher capacity to be able to serve all students and families. So it's not just about what's right in front of us next year, how can we grow our organization so that when these funds go away, we're stronger for it and better able to meet the needs of our students. That was a lot. What questions, comments, concerns do you have?
I just know when I see some of these trainings up there, I'm also serving on the CISA board, and I see that our other school districts within our communities are teaming together to attend these trainings together. So it creates another resource within our communities and area schools that the staff can build relationships with and bounce ideas off, as we heard from Dr. Sullivan and Melanie earlier.
And it makes me kind of excited to know that we have these kind of resources to keep the trajectory going on our course. That should help. We should see that go up and up and up with that kind of targeted assistance.
Thank you, that was a big report. Any questions or comments? Okay, is there a motion to approve the ESSER fund recommendations?
I so move.
Thank you. Is there a second? And a second, okay. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried.
Thank you very much. And I'm excited for getting this opportunity. Like I said, some heart-stopping times this last night. I was wondering how it's going to happen.
And proposed 21-22 budget, next, Rachel.
All this information is in your packet, so I'm gonna just kind of do the high-level view of some of the areas, but just want to reiterate that our fiscal year does start July 1st, so we do need an operating budget to start that fiscal year. So this is really called a preliminary original budget.
We don't set, for all the new board members, we don't set the final budget, until October. So we operate for 4 months on a lot of assumptions and a lot of estimates, and that is also financial. So, and as you know right now, there's not even a biennial budget, so we really know for sure what factors we're planning for. So, we do a lot of, estimating in the beginning and then tie it up in October. So a lot of the pieces of the expenditure budget we've approved along the way, since January. We've approved capital maintenance projects, a bus for next year, a lot of staffing, goal reductions and increases, through that process as we reprioritize some of those items that are listed in the packet. Some of the main assumptions that I used were what the Joint Finance Committee is talking about or had approved, I guess, already personally. And I wrote this, that hadn't happened yet, so know that. But these are assumptions that I've been using since December, we, as an administrative team, but it is something that we were looking at a 0 per pupil increase in the revenue limit. And just a reminder, the revenue limit is our spending authority for the district. It's the major bulk of funds that we get between state equalization aid and property taxes. So what happens there if there is no increase? That's saying there's no increase because of inflation. There's no increase for new things. So we have to do a lot of reprioritization within our current budget structure. The other piece for a low spending district like Black River Falls, we have enjoyed increasing that revenue limit the last couple of years due to a low revenue ceiling. That also is slated not to increase and remain at $10,000, so we would not see an increase with that. And then another significant per pupil categorical aid we started receiving a few years ago. That also isn't set to increase by anything. And as you can see, I noted the governor's proposal was $750 per pupil, and the Joint Finance Committee keeps that at $742 per pupil, as it has been the last 2 years. The other big piece, I don't think everybody realizes always how this interplays with our operating fund, is our special education aid. Due to fund accounting, we have to keep all of our expenses for special education separate. They are coded in Fund 27. And what happens is we don't receive enough aid from federal or state sources to account for all those additional special education costs. So then we have to make a transfer from our Fund 10 general budget to Fund 27. Over the past few years, as you could maybe notice in our documents, that's increased. It's actually going to be over $3 million estimated for next year. So it increases 100 to 150 or 200,000 each year, just because costs increase, salaries, benefits, costs of educating kids.
Contracted services.
Contracted services have been a big piece of that. We've hired a lot more aides. That's been a bigger piece too. Because we receive a lot of kids that need that one-on-one. They come to us from other districts where they've had that in their IEP, and we have to continue that service as well. And it's necessary for them. My concern is that even if the reimbursement goes to 28%, because the some certain appropriation, what that means is a set dollar amount, and they divvy it up based on what expenditures districts have. So it's not, because I spent this much, I'm gonna get 28% of that in aid. It's, oh, we have this pot of money, oh, all the districts spent this much, now I need to divvy it up and prorate it to all those districts. So I'm always a little bit conservative on what we're gonna get back in aid. That's about $945,000, $950,000 in that special education budget. But the majority of that revenue in Fund 27 comes from the transfer of about $3 million from Fund 10. Any questions on any of those assumptions? Okay. Then I had all the items that you had already approved at the bottom of the sheet there, talking about the $23 million budget. That includes our CARES Act money that we received this year and have spent most of one of those allocations, and the ESSER 2 money for next year. But I did not include ESSER 3 in there. At the time of this, I just didn't know where that was going to be, and there's not even an application out there yet for ESSER 3, but there is that. Some of the highlights that I wanted to just go over with some of the details. So this, the far right column, of course, is 21-22 estimated budget. And 2021 are budgeted amounts. I did not put in actual amounts because even though we only have 2 weeks left of the fiscal year, lots happened in these 2 weeks. We pay out staff, a good portion of their contract, so if I would have put actual expenditures there, it would have seemed understated, so I left the budget there. 1920 is actual expenditures. So the first revenue point that I want to talk about is the property tax. That actually is looking to decrease, and that is not even including the large state aid funds that are being talked about at the state right now with the Joint Finance Committee. That is purely because of our equalization aid going up a little bit and where our shared costs fit into that going to the state. I estimate that it could even be a lower amount if we allow it to do that. Because we paid out so much debt this past year through our defeasance process, having those additional funds available to pay off debt and refinance that debt and save interest costs, that's another shared cost that the state participates in, so we get aid on those costs as well. So when we get aid, that means our property tax amount goes down as well. That's kind of what my concern about the new state aid dollars, I just don't know enough about it yet at this point. And by the way, we've got 4 more months to set the levy. This isn't the final levy by any means. I know it will change, so just need to have something there to react to and have in the budget. My concern is that those state aid funds are going to be for 1 or 2 years, and then what happens after 2 years? Do they take them away? Do they continue? What happens to our levy then if the state aid funds go down? Does the levy shoot up again? So we just need to be able to manage that tax rate as well, because we don't want to see that bouncing too far low and then have to go back up again. As I said, those are our main revenues. There's property tax, and as you'll see down below, our state equalization aid is the $11.5 million. That's estimated to go up a little bit. Again, I think that's going to go up more than what's shown there. Any questions on any of those other details in the Fund 10 budget? And then in the expenditure, that was the revenue. So then in the expenditures, I'm sure you saw this 7.77%. That might have jumped out at you for salaries. Remember, we just saw the ESSER budget. We hired 9 additional staff people. That is included in that salary number. So the majority of that is being funded from the ESSER 2 funds, which are in this budget. Our second biggest cost is our health insurance, so staff costs and then health insurance, which is typical in the school district. And then our open enrollment out number is always concerning, and COVID threw a wrench in there as well, so I'm not sure what to expect for next year. And that's always something we don't know actually until the last day of school of that year of what that number is going to be. So I really don't know until June 8th next year what that full dollar amount will be. We can estimate that the first day of school with the open enrollment in and out applications, but we really don't know the final number until they can move throughout the year. It's more fluid than it used to be. Any questions on Fund 10? And then you can see that transfer to Fund 27 of $3 million there. That's an expense to Fund 10. So if that revenue, that state reimbursement rate goes up, we receive more than we plan on, those funds actually stay in Fund 10 then and can be used for other instructional resources or whatever it is the district chooses to use them for. And as you can see too, I noted that the fund balance is at 21%, estimated to be at 21% for next year. That is for board policy, 21% of expenditures. And the benefit for us is that we don't have to short-term borrow to pay operating expenses. we get our aid in 4 big chunks. There's a lot of districts that have to borrow in those in-between times, those November and May kind of time before they get their aid in December and June. We don't have to do that because we are able to cover our own expenses through having a strong fund balance. The other thing I would note is that certainly was a factor when I talked to Moody's when they were doing our rating calls for our bonding. We still maintained a strong rating, and that helped us with when we went out for borrowing and the interest rates that we received on the bonds for the facilities referendum as well. I'm not going to go through the other funds. They were there for you unless you have any questions on them. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the tax levy. So again, we saw what Fund 10 might look like. Fund 39, if you're looking in the 21-22 budget year, that is per our debt schedule. But again, we could do the visas route and pay an additional amount there to pay off that debt sooner if we'd like to do that. We don't have to make that decision again until October, we know all the factors. So I looked at just at what the scheduled debt is for this purpose. You can see that the total levy would drop to $8 million from $8.6 million. In Fund 80, I should have mentioned that as well. That is a $10,000 levy for the community education piece. We started doing that last year. And then the other piece is 10% of the activities director can be quoted there for all the scheduling that he does throughout the district for our buildings with the youth groups and other community members. Estimated a little bit of increase in our equalized value, and that results in a tax rate per $1,000 of property value of $8.30, which is a significant drop from this year at $8.98. And again, this is, if I say worst case, I mean the highest tax rate. I think it might even be lower than that if you look at our actual numbers. But the aid is such a wild card right now. I didn't put that in here, and it also is dependent on what other districts do with their budgets actual. How much they spend, how much are they going to get of that aid pot as well. So what I'd be looking for, if there are no questions, and certainly entertain any questions, would be an approval of the Fund 10 budget as presented. I'll put it in the format to publish it in the newspaper as required through the state, and then setting that tax levy as well.
Does anyone have any questions?
I make a motion to approve the proposed 2021-2022 budget as presented.
Second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Policy committee met, and we have a couple of first readings of policies to review.
All right, so the employee grievance policy and procedure is the first,
It's okay to appear in here because it's embedded in here as well, Phil. You're fine. There it is. After the board walked through the employee grievance procedure this spring for the first time in many, many years, the attorney that assisted us with that process said that our policy was clunky and could use an awful lot of streamlining. And so this is that net effect. You certainly had it available to read, but here's the long and short of it. The process would be for an employee who feels that they wanted to grieve a discussion. It has to be on discipline, workplace safety. The post-Act 10, there is far fewer things that they can grieve. So it's either employee termination, discipline, or workplace safety. Those are the only grievable areas right now. What the long and short of it is, first go to your immediate supervisor. If it can't be resolved there, then it comes to me. If I can't resolve it there, then it goes to an impartial hearing officer. If it can't be resolved there, it comes to the full board. And some people feel like those last two steps should maybe be the opposite direction,
because people in the community are talking to you about it, and in essence, an impartial hearing officer is one that gets to make the decision at that point, and so it might feel awkward that you still don't know all of the facts of the case. But if you think about it in who has the final say, after the impartial hearing officer, if either the district or the grievance are not satisfied, they bring it to the school board, and you are the last line, you are the end person. So while it might feel awkward in that in-between stage when community are talking to you about it, if they know about it, it's a personnel matter, but sometimes that happens, that you wouldn't have the details of the case until it went to the impartial hearing officer, and then either side could bring that to you. The idea that I have heard from the board is that you would like as much local authority as possible, and so felt like you would want the final say if the impartial hearing officer makes a decision that we don't agree with. So that's the long and short of the process. Is you're not concerned or questions about that? All right. So then the policy committee also looked at the employee handbooks. There were very, very few changes in it. Honestly, the employee grievance policy was the biggest part of it. And then the next biggest part was way down at the end with the COVID flexibility. So do you have any questions about what you saw in there? All right. There are no questions. I'll bring them back next month for your second meeting.
Review it. If you have any questions, send them on to Dr. Severson, and we can address that for next month. You receive your meeting minutes in your packet. Are there any corrections or additions? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you.
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carried. Dr. Severson.
I just have one thing, and I already alluded to it. I have been waiting to hear about masks before I communicated with families about next school year. So either end of this week or early next week, the two big points I'm going to hit are that the face coverings will be individual choice, and that the virtual programming will not be available to all students, that high school kids need to have demonstrated success, or all students would need to have an individual health plan that would preclude them from coming physically into the building. So that will be going out to families, and then Elizabeth will be the contact for any of those individual health plans to work through those. And just to be clear, that is similar to like the 504 document, IEP document, that she, as the health individual of the district, works with the medical doctor to provide clarity around what is okay, what's not okay. It's not a simple doctor's note that says this student must go virtual. There needs to be more conversation like a 504 plan or something like that that gives more clarity. So just wanted you to know.
Wisconsin Association School Board information. We did have our first face-to-face meeting in 17 months last weekend, or 2 weekends ago, I guess it was. And as you see, there's a program coming up in July in Green Bay. I know Ann has signed up, and it's about the board governance process and everything. So I know Anna's going, and I did sign up. I might have a conflict, but please take a look at that if you're interested in going.
Was that the 24th?
Yes, the 20th, Saturday, the 24th. Yeah. Any conference and workshop attendance by anybody? Okay. School board connection opportunities. And Brad, I know you attended summer school.
Yeah.
You can get that.
Yeah, I was able to come here and wander around. We were at summer school, talked to some of the teachers, and ran into Tom Chambers, and he's have a month left yet? When is it?
No, next week, July 1.
The end of this month it is? Okay.
Yeah, June 30th.
So yeah, it was a lot, and how many, 75 students?
Yeah, the high schools had an amazing turnout for summer school. Honestly, it's just been amazing. I think they have been running between 70 and 80 students for each one of those, and there's some kids really putting a dent in that credit recovery that they needed, which is great. That, as we talked about last month, that's a significant expense. Our hope would be that during the course of this next year, they recover those credits from the COVID year, that we don't have to invest as heavily in summer school. Time will tell.
So it was kind of neat to see all levels. So in one classroom, I stuck my head in, and I think they were counting the Fridays in July or something like that. And then I stood behind a couple of students working on their online classes, and they should not, with Fridays.
the sharing. Okay, future agenda items. Do we have anything they would like to add to the agenda for consideration? Hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned.